Okay, great. Okay, hi everyone. Thank you. So today I'm talking about mostly a paper that I have in review right now, Forest for Forest, combining vegetation indices and solar-induced fluorescence in random forest models to improve the prediction of gross primary productivity in the Boreal Forest. So as many of you all know, we can measure, obviously this is not a measurement, but it's more of a measurement than really model plant carbon uptake or gross primary productivity locally using this network of flux towers, but we need remote sensing to scale these observations from all of these individual point measurements to get some sense of what global gross primary productivity looks like, and remote sensing is kind of the best available tool we have to do that. Is there a way that I can actually remove the screen in the corner? I don't know. It's okay if not. On this one.
It's on.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so remote sensing metrics that I'm going to be talking about are typically based on the light use efficiency model of photosynthesis. So quick debrief on that. We have light coming down from the sun and hitting a plant canopy. So that's our photosynthetically active radiation. A portion of that light is absorbed. So APAR, so a fraction of the total, some of it hits branches or the soil or whatever, not being used for photosynthesis. So then a portion of that light that's absorbed goes to drive photosynthesis, and this can vary depending on the stress conditions that the plant is experiencing and the amount of light. Oftentimes plants receive so much sunlight or their stress conditions that they need to kind of throw some of that light away without damaging the plant. So that will be dissipated as heat using chemical mechanisms that kind of use the light in ways other than photosynthesis. And so we get this kind of regime. It looks very similar to kind of these GPP light response curves where under light limited environments, you just have an increase of photosynthesis with light. And then at some point you have saturation and you get this kind of curved shape. And so based on that, we can say that GPP is equal to APAR times the light use efficiency of photosynthesis. So how much light is absorbed times how efficient essentially is a plant at turning this light energy into photosynthesis. And so remote sensing metrics are typically either sensitive to APAR, so the physical factors controlling how much light is absorbed by the canopy, or the light use efficiency of photosynthesis, the physiological factors and how much light is going down that heat dissipation pathway. There's also this kind of third pathway, which is the solar-induced fluorescence pathway, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but these are kind of the three pillars of things that remote sensing metrics that try and get at GPP will be sensitive to. And so commonly we use vegetation reflectance indices to track productivity across space and time. So one of the kind of first ones to develop and most widely used is NDVI, which takes advantage of the difference between the red and the near infrared of reflectance. So here there's just the reflectance from vegetation as a function of wavelength. And you can see there's this sharp increase between the red and the near infrared. And so with NDVI, we can say it's generally a proxy for how much light is being absorbed by the plants, because if you have more green chlorophyll causing this increase in the reflectance, you'll have more light. And so that's great. And we can get these beautiful maps of NDVI from spatial observations, and that has led to a whole lot of amazing science. Unfortunately, there's a major limitation with these reflectance-based indices, and in particular ones that take advantage of this sharp increase. And that is that greenness-based vegetation indices tell us about structure, but they do a really poor job at tracking GPP in evergreen ecosystems. So here I've got NIRV, which is sort of an extension of NDVI, but still makes use of that sharp increase in vegetation reflectance. and NDVI in the Boreal Forest for one specific forested location with GPP. And then you can see two images in January and July. And as we all know from evergreen ecosystems, the forest structure is not really changing a whole lot. And so over the course of the season, the amount of light that the forest is absorbing is really only changing because of the amount of light it's receiving, but not because of any changes to the forest structure. And so these vertical blue shaded regions are also periods of snow cover. So you can see there's some seasonality in NIRV and NDVI especially, but those can essentially entirely be attributed to the presence or absence of snow cover. And so if you're just measuring how green a forest is, if you have snow on there, it's going to change the color, but it's not going to do anything to tell you about what's actually going on for the physiological mechanisms in the plants. So we can also use vegetation indices that are sensitive to pigments that regulate the energy dissipation. And so here I have the chlorophyll carotenoid index and the photochemical fluorescence index. And you can see both of these do a better job at tracking the seasonality of GPP than those greenness-based indices do. PRI has kind of a lower R-squared value because, again, it's really sensitive to the presence of snow cover. CCI a little bit less so, and you can see it does a much better job at tracking that seasonality. And then kind of the rapidly developing one is solar-induced chlorophyll fluorescence, which is sensitive to both the physical and the physiological factors influencing GPP. And that is typically why we see it as a better proxy for GPP in a lot of different ecosystems. So you can see here, SIF at the top, sensitive to both the structure and the physiology of the plants, and an improved R-squared value over these physiologically or structurally sensitive metrics. So as of recent, studies at the leaf and tower level have highlighted a lot more nuance to this relationship. So from satellite-based measurements, and similar to what I just showed, there's a pretty nice linear relationship between SIF and GPP. But smaller scale studies at higher spatial and temporal resolutions show that there's much more scatter to this relationship. So here is just the SIF-GPP relationship at a half-hourly resolution from a paper I recently published. And you can see, one, that there's just a lot of scatter in the data. There's a difference between what this relationship looks like depending on the season, and it's also not a straight linear relationship. And so it kind of leads to the question, how can we kind of improve our ability to use SIF as a proxy for GPP and kind of explain these nuances a little bit better. So the central question my research is trying to ask is, can we use the combined information from SIF and vegetation indices to improve our ability to predict GPP? So here's SIF and all the vegetation indices, and then GPP. And so our general methods are to collect a bunch of data. Here is the bunch of data, choosing a statistical approach and then testing it out. So I collected 2.5 years of tower-based remote sensing data at a 30-minute resolution across 2 Boreal Forest field locations. One at Neon Delta Junction in Alaska, and they're both Boreal evergreen forest locations. Evergreen again, because we don't see big changes in forest structure, making kind of these less traditional non-greenness-based species more useful. And then the southern Old Black Spruce site, both of them are part of the FluxNet network, and data from my power-based remote sensing will hopefully be made available very soon. But talk to me if you're interested. And I'm using PhotoSpec, which is a tower-based instrument that can measure SIF and vegetation indices pretty much every 20 seconds in the flux tower footprint. And then I'm aggregating that to a 30-minute resolution to compare with the flux tower GPP product. So then the statistical approach, I'm using random forest models because they're a powerful tool for understanding nonlinear multi-parameter relationships in complex systems. So they're non-parametric in nature. So we're not kind of prescribing this is what we think the relationships between these remote sensing metrics and GPP are going to be. We're kind of letting the data tell us a little bit more kind of how those dynamics and relationships work. And it's also highly interpretable with predictor importance estimates. So you can see how important different remote sensing signals or environmental inputs are to predicting a certain variable. To kind of confirm the ability of random forest models for this purpose, we trained 2 random forest models with environmental variables to see if they can reproduce the empirical SIF-GPP PAR relationships, which are relatively more well understood than the SIF-GPP relationship itself. And so at a 30-minute resolution, we trained a SIF model and a GPP model with a variety of environmental inputs. As you can see, for both, PAR was the most important variable. So just both of them are sensitive to light, but also have varying sensitivities to other environmental inputs. And so then we tested these environmentally driven random forest models with collected data and sort of the present empirical fit based on the light use efficiency model. So this top plot here, we have SIF in red and GPP in black, all of the data, and then these sort of like empirical relationships based on the light use efficiency model. And then using our 2 random forest models, we predicted what those light response curves would look like for every single month based on the average environmental inputs for that month and the range of PAR values that the month experiences. And so that's here. And as you can see, the random forest model does a pretty good job at kind of matching what our empirical understanding looks like based on the average values for that month. So given the fact that SIF and vegetation indices provide information on the physical and physiological controls on GPP, and that random forest models can tell us about these empirical relationships, kind of the core of my research here is asking if we can use these random forest models to improve the prediction of GPP based on remotely sensed metrics, SIF and vegetation indices. I'm sure you all kind of know where I'm going with this, but we're going to go through it anyway. So we trained 2 random forest models to predict GPP based on remotely sensed and then readily accessible environmental drivers. So air temperature, and then DF, which is a diffuse fraction of radiation. So GPP can depend on if the forest is receiving direct or diffuse light. And so we trained 2 of them, one for the Southern Old Black Spruce site and one for the Delta Junction site, both at a half-hourly resolution. As you can see for both sites, SIF was a very important predictor. Air temperature was also a very important predictor just for the Delta Junction site. I don't have a great explanation for that at this present moment, but it is, does experience far intenser temperature extremes, and so I'm thinking that's potentially something that has to do with it. And so then we used this, both of these random forest models to compare with the existing fits. And I'm gonna just show data from the Southern Old Black Spruce site, but we see essentially the same results for the Delta Junction site. So here is kind of the existing state of the SIF-GPP relationship, which is just the plot SIF, plot GPP, throw a line through it and call it a day. And so based on that linear model, we predicted GPP and then compared it to our measured GPP. So that's this bottom plot here. And we get an R-squared value of 0.59, which is not terrible, but we're, we want to make this as good as we can. So we can improve on that using a nonlinear monthly variable SIF-GPP model, which is something that I proposed in a recent paper. And essentially this acknowledges the fact that the relationship between SIF and GPP varies depending on the month. And if we implement that, we get an improvement in the R-squared value, a pretty big improvement, and also see a reduction in, there's an overestimation of GPP in winter, and that totally goes away if we use this monthly variable relationship. But the moment you've all been waiting for, if we use this random forest modeling approach to predict GPP, we see a big improvement in our ability to predict GPP based on these remotely sensed metrics, and having our R-squared value jump up to 0.9. If you're familiar with random forest and the out of bag score, which is essentially how well does the model perform on entirely unseen data, I believe that was 0.8, so a little bit worse, but still significantly better than any of these kind of empirical models. Okay, so we also wanted to see if this approach would work across sites. And so if we're thinking about satellite-based measurements of remote sensing products and trying to predict GPP, we want those to be as kind of universally applicable as possible. And so we aggregated the data to a daily resolution and then put all of the information from both sites into a random forest model, which is shown here. We also included a site flag, which would tell the model if data is coming from the old black spruce or the Delta Junction site. And what we find is that the model, one, does a great job, and two, that the site information was the least important predictor for the model. And so what that tells us is that our random forest model is not site specific. It can be applied across multiple locations to predict GPP. And so although this was just using power-based data, I think scaling it up to the satellite level, because it's not site specific, is a really exciting opportunity to kind of improve our prediction of GPP across space and time. Okay, perfect. I'm on my last slide. Okay, so conclusion. So when it comes to remotely sensed data, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So the more remotely sensed data that you can provide, the more information you're going to get, because all of these different things present different information on the structure and the function of the plants. And if you can get both of that information, you're going to be better off. Random forest models are really cool and exciting for understanding these really complex data sets. They can pull information kind of from the noise of remote sensing data. And finally, combining SIF and vegetation indices in a random forest model outperforms traditional empirical models for GPP based on SIF alone. So with that, I'll take any questions, and here's my contact information, and thank you.
Yeah, we are running out of time, so maybe if you have questions, please talk to Zoe and ask questions. Good. Okay.
I wore a bright shirt, so I should be easy to find.
Yeah. So next up is a team talk by Stoy, Nilroth Ly, and Anam Khan. You ready?
Can you hear me online? Oh no, I can. Okay. All right. Thanks everybody very much. We're very excited to be giving this presentation here on the second day of the year of remote sensing. I'm very excited about the years of remote sensing. And we're going to be talking about trying to, estimating fluxes from towers in space at the same time, moving toward a real-time estimates of gross primary productivity, GPP, from eddy covariance and geostationary satellites. The funding for this endeavor comes from National Science Foundation and the University of Wisconsin. Why did I post over here? University of Wisconsin. My laptop, but this one. Ah, oh, I lost connection. We're having an AV issue. Is that gonna work?
Yeah, I lost connection about a half an hour. Haven't gotten it back.
I hope I'm connected.
That looks good.
Well, that's my laptop.
That's just on your lap, yeah.
So you do this, and you just have to point to my laptop.
Okay, okay. Got it.
Once she's got it plugged in.
It's plugged in.
Give it a try now.
Give it a try.
It works. You point it and we'll push it.
Make sure your focus is on that.
Yes, point over here and I'll know you want to advance.
I'll just say, Margaret, please advance.
No, just wait. I can even quicker.
Okay, advance. Okay, so funding comes from the National Science Foundation, University of Wisconsin. The data are coming from geostationary satellites, which are administered by NASA and NOAA. And of course, we're always indebted to AmeriFlux for providing the eddy covariance data. Anam Khan is the person who made many of the figures in this presentation. I'd like to point out two publications from last year and this year that she wrote that this talk is very reliant upon. Joel McCorkle as well. He's a colleague at NASA. If you know Joel, I found out this morning that he just got married, so please say congrats to Joel. And information from the MTSG, that's Steve Running's former group at the University of Montana Advancement. So polar orbiting satellites, as we know, have absolutely revolutionized our understanding of the carbon cycle. Things like MODIS and Landsat and their ability to measure things like NDVI help us understand how the carbon cycle has changed over time. And we can get annual estimates of things like net primary productivity, and we can get estimates of things like gross primary productivity on, let's say, like an 8-day basis or something like that. But a lot of things happen in 8 days. A lot of phenology happens. A lot of extreme events happen. A lot of flash droughts can happen, okay? We are fluxers. We want to understand the processes. We measure at half-hourly time periods or maybe hourly time periods, right? We want to know how fluxes change as they're happening. And geostationary satellites, as wonderful as they are, can't quite get there. Thank you, Margaret. So what's happened over the past, really for the United States sensors, about 5 years, really since 2017, is that new imagers on weather satellites, so geostationary satellites, have similar spectral sensitivity to MODIS and Landsat. And so this is a figure by Joel, published in a paper by Anam in 2021. The spectral sensitivity of GOES, the geostationary operational environmental satellites, so both 16 is on the east, 17 is on the west, that we are all familiar with from watching the weather reports. Those things are now measuring in the visible and the near infrared for actually multiple years. And these satellites also are not going away. Okay, MODIS actually has a finite lifetime, but we're always going to be measuring with weather satellites. They have their mission already out to 2024. And if we stop investing in weather satellites as a society, we can probably assume that there's a lot of problems going on. Okay, so these weather satellites are reliable. There's huge investments, and they now measure things that can help us, although as Zoe just explained, not perfectly, understand something as important to us as the carbon cycle. So this is one example. There was some foundational work by Catherine Wheeler and Mike Dietz on estimating NDVI on a daily basis from these geostationary satellites. I'd like to point out their nice papers. But this is some work from Conadel 2021 demonstrating fire in California where we can see NDVI before the fire after the fire and its difference, right? This is the fire here in Northern California. And because geostationary satellites, they're measuring in real time, really every 10 minutes. It's a lot of data. But you can see things as they're, oh, could you advance, please? You can see things as they're happening, right? So, come back. So inside the fire perimeter, you can see this is top of atmosphere NDVI, and we'll describe why it's important to distinguish that in the next couple of slides. Inside of the fire perimeter, right, you have consistently high NDVI. There's going to be a diurnal cycle because there's going to be some zenith angle, as well as outside the fire perimeter, you can see the fire, and then you can also track its recovery. And of course, you can do similar things with geostationary satellites, or sorry, polar orbiting satellites as well. But this gives us one more view on the dynamics of ecosystems as they're working every day. Next slide, please. So what we've been trying to work on in lab and with some wonderful colleagues, I'll explain in a few slides, is that we can also use these satellites, we believe, to monitor GPP. How do we do that? Okay, this is all work from Conadol 2022. Citation is there. And JGR, like Ankur points out, a wonderful journal. So we can, what GOES is actually measuring is top of atmosphere reflectance, right? Now also in the visible and near infrared, as well as multiple channels in the far infrared microwave to understand clouds and water. Applying the Pi6S atmospheric attenuation algorithm in a bidirectional reflectance function, we can estimate surface reflectance from whence we can calculate vegetation indices like NDVI, the enhanced vegetation index, and also the NIRV, right? Like this was pointed out by Zoe. For a long, long time, and I don't know if our community fully understands this, GOES has estimated shortwave radiation upon the surface really accurately for a number of years now. There's well-established algorithms to estimate how much shortwave radiation the land surface is receiving. And these have been worked on since the 80s. Bringing these two things together, right, we can estimate photosynthetically active radiation, we're calling P. We're testing multiple different models for GPP. And at least for the sites that we've investigated, right, a light response curve using NIRV multiplied by radiation. So NIRV P is the key thing. Right, with an initial slope parameter and then a saturation parameter as a function of vapor pressure deficit, seems to do a good job at estimating GPP at some of our favorite AmeriFlux ecosystems.
Before continuing with the presentation, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Nilroth Ly. I'm from Cambodia, and I'm an undergrad working with Dr. Paul from University of Wisconsin Madison. I'd also like to point out that the following 4 slides come from Anam's paper published earlier this year, and that I owe none of the credit, which begs the question, why am I actually talking? But for a few reasons, for one, I'm part of the lab. 2 is something I'll be working with in the future, and 3rd, it's a good learning experience for me. So up here is the GPP variations over a period of 1 week at the Tonsi Ranch site, characterized as an open savanna ecosystem. On it are 3 different models that Anam tested. The green one is the NIRVP light response curve between NIRVP and GPP, and the black one is a linear relationship between the NIRVP and GPP, and then the blue one is a modest type light use efficiency model. Among the 3, as Paul mentioned, the light response curve, green one, yields the smallest mean absolute errors. Over here, I want you to take note of the time period between April and June, which is a dry season. So there's a high vapor pressure deficit leading to a spermata closure during the noon hour. So the peak in GPP occurs during the morning time. Among the 3 models, the right response curve was best able to capture that shift in peak daily GPP. This right here is a 2 years period, and all the models were able to capture the seasonal variation. You can see the peaks up there, but the 2 other models, the bottom 2, overestimated the the dryness limitation of GPP, and that is seen by the dips below the first peak, right there.
All right, next slide, please. Oh, just this.
Oh yeah. We also tested the models at other EC sites. This one is from Willows Creek, managed by Minkyu's lab, and more sites are being looked at, and that is part of my contribution going forward in the future.
Next slide, please. Yeah, so the challenge, okay, thank you, Nora, is that, right, these are a lot of data. Okay, pixels are similar to MODIS, right, about 1 kilometer. They're coming every 10 minutes, or in some cases even more. So as we've been talking, there's been an image of the entire Western Hemisphere, right, that the geostationary satellites have provided to us. And the whole purpose of that is to provide immediate information to managers and stakeholders and people like us. So we need to figure out how to wrangle all of these data. And a nice thing about the University of Wisconsin and the Space Science and Engineering Center is this is one of the places where geostationary satellites first were sort of developed, and two, where a lot of these data come into and are processed. And they're, of course, publicly available, right? Straight from Amazon AWS and a number of the other sources, but it's still a lot of data. So here's one image, for example, of NARV across Wisconsin for midday period on June 2nd. Right, you can see all of the rich spatial variability, including some that Ankur and the group talked about yesterday. Right, we'd really like to get a handle on the best way of estimating GPP for all of these different algorithms, sort of continuously across time, right? Get the diurnal cycle and pattern and understand all the things that are changing GPP. Next slide, please. And then the question also becomes, right, why do we bother with all of this? Why do we want real-time estimates of carbon cycling? One of the most prominent might be crop monitoring. All of the crop models for yield are really using surrogates of GPP, like radiation and temperature and water stresses. If we have a robust and defensible estimate of that all of the time, we'll probably get a better estimate of yield at the end of the day. We can hopefully understand better the direct and diffuse radiation impacts on productivity, which are going to also vary dynamically over the course of the day. That things like MODIS or Landsat might not be able to see or simulate quite as well. There's the impacts of ozone and pollutants, which have complex nonlinear relationships and patterns throughout the course of the day, and plant water stress. And one of those key plant water stresses is flash droughts. Okay, droughts can come on hard and fast, and by the time we've told a farmer or a producer that it's a drought, they've already been planning it for weeks. Okay, they need that immediate information and that knowledge and that forecasting of what might be happening to the carbon cycle that we all care about. We can also use this to couple carbon water cycles more robustly and also use it to estimate evapotranspiration. For this, I'd like to point everybody to Raya Ottenheimer's poster. There's Raya this afternoon, where she did some work using the PTJPL algorithm on geostationary satellites, finding some promising initial results that are really exciting. A lot of what we see for GPP is a response to synoptic weather events that these geostationary satellites are fundamentally designed to be looking at, as well as extreme events. Okay, we can capture the response to cold fronts and warm fronts and all of that dynamic that actually in many cases make up a large amount of the interannual variability of carbon cycling in ecosystems. There's also opportunities to use other indices like the NDWI, and maybe we want to have eventually SIP on weather satellites. And for that, we can actually talk to our colleague, Joel McCorkle, who's currently on his honeymoon, but he's also puzzling over what bands to put on the next generation of geostationary satellites since it's all the way out in 2030, right? And I mentioned ecological forecasting, the things you can do that. And I'm sure there's more applications that we haven't thought of yet. Next slide, please. The other thing that's kind of fun and unique is, unlike the globally viewing polar orbiting satellites, is that the GOES in the US looks at the Western Hemisphere and it looks at the Americas, okay? We need a FluxNet type collaboration to work on this globally, and there's a global convergence in the spectral sensitivities of the imagers on geostationary satellites. So forthcoming for the Europeans is the flexible combined imager on Meteosat 3rd generation that will be viewing Africa and Europe. Himawari, the advanced Himawari imager, has extremely similar spectral sensitivities to the GOES advanced baseline imager. It is viewing, of course, East Asia, Australia, the maritime continent here. GeoComsat 2 from the South Koreans is measuring a similar part of the world, of course. The Chinese have Fengyang 4A and B. And there's also, you might have noticed, thank you for advancing, a problem with all of this. Okay, geostationary satellites don't see the poles very well, but there is a unique and extremely irregular orbit called the Linnia orbit. And the Russians have a satellite called Arctica M that now also has similar spectral sensitivities to the geostationary satellites that are above the equator. And that equator is going to come up in the next slide, right? So we can't see the poles very well with geostationary satellites, but the Linnia orbit satellites, they kind of swoop around Antarctica and hover over the North Pole for a little while. You got the polar regions, where you can capture images of the most changing part of our planet, the extreme northern latitudes. That's Greenland right there for reference. This is a paper by Asmus and others in 2021. Next slide, please. Another advantage, I know that we're sitting here in beautiful northern Michigan, okay, but fluxes happen globally, and geostationary satellites are going to be able to, they do view equatorial regions better than temperate regions on average. So I know we talked about how the ICOS meeting is coming up in a couple of weeks. I'd also like to point out Asia Flux is happening in a couple of weeks. Right, it's going to be in Kuching and Sarawak in Malaysian Borneo. And so that's going to be happening right there. And the location of Fengyang 4A is right there. GeoComsat 2A is right there. Fengyang 4B is right there. Himawari 8 and 9 is there. Okay, so if you're thinking about all of those critical and extremely cloudy, oftentimes, ecosystems around the equator, the geostationary satellites can see, right? If you have clouds passing over, they can see through the clouds a bit more. Right? If you happen to have a cloud at 11 and 2 and Moses is passing over, you might not have an observation that day, right? But if you have geostationary satellites, right, you might be able to find that sunny period and get an estimate of what's happening at the surface. And this comes into, right, this FluxNet style collaboration. Right? It's fun to work with people like our colleague Young Ryu, who is doing some really great work with his group on the GeoComsat 2A satellite, right? And similar things to what we're working on here. It's just, you know, it's been fun working with the Europeans who have their satellites. And so we're trying to build sort of FluxNet style collaboration to kind of advance the science of geostationary satellites and turn them in from weather satellites into biogeochemistry satellites, so carbon monitoring satellites. And there's an initiative called GeoNext, which is supported by NASA, which is helping us take those steps. And we just wanted to kind of advertise all these things and let people know that we can kind of embody Dennis Goldocky's vision of measuring everything all the time. Nothing's perfect, right? But we have a lot of tools at our disposal, and we're taking the baby steps to get there. So that's all we have, and thank you so much again.
So we have plenty of time for Q&A. If you have any questions.
Oh. I saw you first.
Thank you, Paul. That's a great presentation. I'm wondering if you can comment a little bit on the capability of boosting satellite in detecting from water stress in timely manner.
So that's a great question. The answer is yes, but they're pretty adept at measuring the land surface temperature. And to the extent that you can use land surface temperature to estimate plant water stress, they're going to do a good job. When it comes to some of the dynamics of what's happening in those approximately 1 kilometer pixels, right, the ultimate, perhaps best use of these satellites is like a satellite image fusion, where we can use the more hyperspatial observations from something like Landsat in conjunction with the hypertemporal geostationary satellites to get kind of a better space-time resolution. But they've been used for water cycle research and evapotranspiration for actually quite a long time, with algorithms like this Alexi that Martha Anderson developed. So they can do plant water stress, I'd like to argue pretty well. The question of, you know, how to best couple the gross primary productivity estimates with what they've already been doing. But we're actually we're on the shoulders of giants, right? With like Martha. There's a big legacy of research for water cycle with geostationary satellites. Like, can we add the carbon cycle to it? Next question. I saw in the back. Is that okay?
So
Go for it.
I'm really attracted, but I don't know a lot about geostationary satellites. Other than like an obscure view of the pole, what are other shortcomings that come from geostationary satellites?
Oh, well, there's a lot. Like right now, we're really struggling with how the data are managed. They're meant to be looking at hurricanes. They're meant to be like at Penn State, that big, beautiful TV room with all of those geostationary observations. Getting the historical data means you have to download an image of the entire freaking hemisphere over and over and over. Going forward, right, if we have a workflow that takes the images that have been happening since, we've been talking, provides an estimate, going to take a few minutes, and then the next image comes. So then stepping forward, right, we can build that infrastructure to do that. But to do the work to validate it is a bit of a bear. And so that, to me, is one of the biggest limitations. It's fundamentally not designed to like look back in time at a pixel. It's meant to tell someone how hard the hurricane's going to hit Miami. So yeah, Mallory.
I really like this, and this is really interesting. When you envision the FluxNet style, network for geostationary satellites, how do you envision all the different processing algorithms from the different satellites that are run by different countries? Do you have a thought how that harmonization process could go?
Yeah, I did. That's a really excellent question. Thank you for it. Like my thought is diversity, right? You have people thinking about these processes from different countries in different ways with different experiences, and also coming up with their approaches to the algorithms and the ecosystems that they care about. So noticing already that Young Riel's group is pushing forward some of the science and doing it in a similar way to us, but different, like it brings the ideas, right? So instead of, bless them, it's like you hit that entire floor at Boston University that does the modes processing. Okay, they have absolutely changed how we know the carbon cycle, right? And also, right, because you have this forced internationality of the geostationary satellites, right, we get to get all the ideas in the world kind of coming and applying it to their system, that because of the synergies and analogies of the systems over here, we can start exploring as well. So that's my simple answer to that question. More breaks?
I do love it.
Okay. Thanks again, everybody.
Yeah, please talk.
Thanks, Nilroth, too, and thanks, everybody.
Okay, so last but not least, we had the last speaker, Minkyu Moon from Boston University. And I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. First, I would say I'm really sorry. I really wanted to be there, but actually today is the officially the first day of my son's preschool. So I really want to be with him. So yeah, really sorry. But okay. So today's talk is that I would share the recent data set we are published, and then the manuscript that we published in the scientific data. The title is the high spatial resolution land surface technology data set for AmeriFlux and neon site. And then my name is Minkyu Moon, and then my long-term collaborator, Andrew Richardson, and then at NAU, and then Thomas Milliman, and then University of New Hampshire, and my advisor, Mark Friedel. Sorry, Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Only seems not moving. Sorry.
Yeah,
I'll try again. Okay. Oh, sorry. As you know, actually the flux, the measure from the tower, it should be actually measured at the homogeneous and the flat surface. But in a real world, none of the site has such the ideal conditions. So most of the site has their own heterogeneity and has a very complex terrain or ecosystem and a structure. So this paper, the present AFM last year, shows that within the flux tower, there is a concept of footprint. Within a footprint, it consists of the complex, the landscapes or the structures. So to better represent the flux of the measurement of flux, we need to understand, we need to have the better understanding or the detailed information within the flux footprint. And then in regard of the remote sensing perspective, this figure shows that the relationship between the field measured reflectance of near infrared, and then y-axis shows that the satellite measured the reflectance. So here, this panel shows that the relationship between field measured and then 500-meter resolution, spatial resolution MODIS sensor, which has the correlation coefficient 0.51, but with a little bit higher spatial resolution, the HLS, which has a 30-meter spatial resolution, has a little bit higher correlations between them. And even a Planescope, the commercial satellite, which has a 3-meter spatial resolution, the satellite sensor has a little bit better the relationship between the in-situ measure, the field measure, the relationship. So my point is that to have the better understanding of what we measured from the flux tower, we really need to do more to have more understanding of what really happened within the final spatial scale resolution. So among the many others, we need to understanding what's going on within the flux footprint. So what we are focusing on is that phenology. Phenology is just about the timing. So when you especially mention that, say the vegetation phenology, it's about the timing when, especially for the leaves, when leaves comes out or first down. So as you guys know, so once leaves comes out, it means that it starts the photosynthesis, making CO2 fluxes, as well as evapotranspiration, means that the water fluxes. And then these fluxes and then changes in surface properties like leaves or structure change surface energy balances. And such changes in fluxes and the energy balances can affect the changes in the weather and climate. And such changes in climate or weather can also affect the changes in phenology itself. So there are the feedback circulations. And then, so to have a better understanding of the phenology, there are the many efforts at the multiple scale and method for the phenological observation, from the human observation, and then tower-based observation, and then phenocam using a camera, RGB camera, and then drone, and then about today's topic. So, and then the topic we have been doing here at Boston University, I would focus on a little bit interested more about the effort of using a satellite observations. So when actually there is a term, the land surface phenology. This is used to, I say, especially when you use a remote sensing data set to observe vegetation phenology, we use this term, the land surface phenology. So to detect the seasonality of the vegetation activity at the regional to the global scale, we use the remote sensing, the observation, and then the estimate the time series throughout the season. Then using amplitude or many other methods, we detect the timing when it happened or when it starts or when it's end. Then this image shows that in the 2015, green up means that the timing when the seasonal amplitude of EBI2 is across the 50% of amplitude during the green up phase. So as you see here, even if the 500 spatial resolution MODIS data set captures really well at the continental scale, its variation, its geographical variations throughout the continent, you can see the effect of the the topography and the geography and then climate too. And so since early the 2000, our group at the Boston University has been did a ton of efforts as the very first the global scale, the operational based the data set. There's a modest land survey Phenology product called MCD12Q2. It covers the data range is from since the 2001 to as of now. So you can access the data freely. And then as a successor of the modest product, there's a Beers product, because as you know, the modest is toward the end of the lifetime. So we need to continue the purpose of the continuity of the modest record. We have launched the Beers, the satellites, and then using the algorithm developed by Xiaoyang Zhang in South Dakota, the Beers land surface product is provide the global scale land surface data set since 2013. And then for a little more recent progress, so we've used the harmonized Landsat Sentinel, the 30-meter, the spatial resolution, to harmonize the fusion, the image set to acquire the spatial and temporal resolution. Using that, the satellite data set, we've provided the 30-meter resolution land surface product for the entire North America. And then you can also access the data set through the EPIDAC. And then today's talk is gonna more focused on these two things, HLS LSP, and then also the PlanetScope, as I said, the commercial, the satellites, the providing 30-meter, the spatial resolution, which is much higher than when it's compared to HLS, any other the satellites we can access as of now. But it's as I say, it's a commercial, so has a little bit access too. So I'll talk a little bit more about the harmonized Landsat Sentinel, the HLS. It consists of 3 satellites: Landsat A, the Sentinel-2, and 2A and 2B. All 3 satellites are optical satellite, which has a 30-meter spatial resolution. So using that 3 satellites, we can have 2 to 4 day revisit time for global at the 30-meter spatial resolution. And as I said, using this imagery, we have published the land surface Phenology data set for North America, which covers since 2016. So, and then I'll show how it works using HLS. So before 2015, there's only one sensor, the Landsat A. So as you can see here, its temporal resolution is pretty sparse. But once we got the Sentinel-2A, it's getting a little bit better. And finally, once we get all the 3 sensors, as you can see here, we can capture the seasonal dynamics pretty well throughout the season. And using that, and okay, this one is from the MODIS. And even if as we saw that at the continental scale, MODIS captures its geographical variations really well. But this is a place in the Central Valley in California. So as you see here, it covers around 100 kilometers, but it's pretty blurred. But when you look at the 30-meter resolution HLS, it's pretty clear. You can see all the details from the natural vegetation, basically, others say the shrublands, and all the details, the mosaics from the agricultural lands. So it's, others say it's a pretty huge progress. And okay, so now I'm gonna start to talk about more the PlanetScope, the commercial satellite imagery. For the Landsat, the traditional, the optical sensor like the Landsat and Sentinel, it's the dimension of size is about 2 to 3 meters, but the PlanetScope, the constellation, the name of constellation of the PlanetScope, PlanetScope is about size of the kind of the stereo box. It's pretty small, but it consists, as of now, it consists of the over 180 constellations. And then it covers RGB and NIR, near infrared bands, and then covers 350 million square kilometer per day. And then, as I said, it has a 3-meter resolution. But when you look at the data closely, even if its a pixel size is 3 meter, its a nominal size is a little bit bigger. Let's say a 7 or 3 to 5 meter. And then this data covers since the 2016, but it's supposed to have when you compare to other, the traditional, the satellite like a Landsat or Sentinel or MODIS, is supposed to have the lower the radiometric fidelity. And then another very important thing is that it's a commercial, so we can get the data freely. But okay, I will explain a little bit the feature of the PlanetScope imagery when it compared with the HLS and then PhenoChem, the GCC time series. This image shows that from the PlanetScope, the true color imagery at the Harvard Forest, at the center, there's a neon tower. And then this red box, the image at the middle is the zoomed image from this small region. Here you can see the white dot, which is a tower. They installed the PhenoChem camera. And then here you can, these two images from the PhenoChem, the images, you can see that there are two distinguished regions of interest. One for deciduous needle, the evergreen needleleaf, and then the other one deciduous broadleaf. So, and then you can also see the differences as in color and even in this true color imagery. So this imagery captured at the mid-May. So you can see that a little darker green, the patches is conifer, and then the other regions, a little light green is the deciduous forest before leaf out. And then you can, as you can see, this time series shows that the time series from the three independent data set, red dots from the planet, and then blue dots from the HLS, and then green dots from the PhenoChem. As you see here, so in the qualitative sense, they are pretty captures their seasonality pretty well. But when you look at it closely, and then when you compare with the time series with the conifer, so please look at this closely, especially for the HLS, and then differences in HLS and planet. So when you look at the planet and PhenoChem, their differences is pretty clear. But when you look at HLS, even if this data comes from two different pixels from the pixel of HLS, but these two pixels close each other. So its difference is pretty small when you compare to with the planet and PhenoChem. That means that planet can capture at the canopy scale the variations in seasonality of vegetation. And this one is the as I remember, the Illinois Energy Bomb site and the Google Earth the spatial resolution imagery. And then this one is the green update, the 15% amplitude of signal from the HLS. You may remember that, you guys remember that how it was superior when compared to MODIS at the regional scale. But when you compare with the planet and other say HLS imagery is pretty, blurred. So I would say the fine scale variation in LSP that is not visible in even the 30-meter HLS imagery. So that's why, okay, this is now main topic. That's why we have developed the data set. We collected all the data set that covers for each site. we crop the 10 by 10, the 10 by 10 kilometer window for each side, considering their footprint. We would cover enough the coverage, and then we include 104 sites. And I remember that as of now, we have, for the AmeriFlux, we have more than 580 sites. So that means that this data set covers about 1/5 of the whole network. And then to do that, I processed about 62.2 terabytes of raw data. And this is, here, this red box represents 10 by 10 kilometer window for USBI one site. And then most of the satellites like Landsat and the MODIS, they are seen, so-called named the tile. It's used much bigger than our flux footprint or any of the sites. But for this planescope imagery, it consists of more than 100 the small satellites. So each pathway, the size of the scene is pretty much smaller than their other satellite imagery. So for example, for any given day, any one constellation, one the satellite can pass over this area, and then the other one can pass here, can cover here, and then the other one is here and here. And then to crop the 10 by 10, to get the 10 by 10 window, I just crop mosaic, do the mosaic, and then crop this area like this. And then using that imagery for a given day, I stacked all the imagery throughout the whole 5 years since the 2016 to 2022 as of today. Then using that imagery, I did apply the pre-processing, as I explained, just explained the mosaicing, and then did the snow, cloud, and water masking, and then remove the spikes. And then using that, the time series, we fit the smoothing spline using the panelized cubic spline, and then detect a peak or peaks, and then identify the green up and the green down pace. And then using that pace, we estimate the transition date based on their amplitude, like a 15, 50, and 90%. And same for green down pace too. And this one, okay, I'm gonna click, yeah, sorry. Yeah, this one is another example from the Rosemount site in Minnesota. And this one, the zoomed up image, you can see that. And then this one high, the spatial resolution imagery from the Google Earth, you can see that how the PRSP dataset can capture its geographical details pretty well. And then this one shows the EBI amplitude for the same year. And then this one is another example from the LTER site, like California. And then the color shows that the date when the vegetation index peaked at each year. And then the gray color represents there's no vegetation activity at that pixel. In the 2017, or only, I'd say the 30% of pixels have shows that the vegetation activity. But in 2018, almost no pixels have shows that there's algorithm detect that there's no vegetation activity. But in 2021, most of pixels shows that vegetation activities. And then this one shows the time series throughout the 5 years. And then each arrow is correspond to the image, the phenochem image at the site. Then this one, you can see that there are differences in the relative amplitude in the 2017, and then 2018 here, and then 2021 here. And then you can also see the differences, how the greens is different and among each year. Okay, last slide. As a summary, here I introduced we've introduced high spatial LSP for the better, I hope, the better representation of flux measurement interpretation. And then just in terms of the LSP society, I would say we are towards to a moderate to high spatial resolution, but it's still too short. And then, as I said, some of them is commercial, so have a limited access, and then it also means that high spatial resolution means that it can increase the exponential, the computational load. And then here for today's talk, and then our group only used optical sensor, but there's lots of effort using active sensor like a SIP or hyperspectral and the geostationary data set. But we never used that. But yeah, it's gonna be a good alternative of what we did. And then I'll just say the last word. So the key part of our whole report is that we should keep moving on. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, we don't have so much time for Q&A, but if you have questions, you can leave your question in the chat in the Zoom. So right now it's 10:28, but we will reconvene at 10:40.
Coffee and bacteria and tea. Someone monitoring the chat. Can I have a question?
If Minkyu is available to take Q&A right now.
Yeah, you can ask the question. Yeah, if you want, yeah.
Okay, where's the camera? Hi.
Hi.
I'm down under. I've been working on LSP in Australia. So how do you think having the improved LSP can help other scientists with what they're doing with carbon water coupling and GPP estimation? So how do you think the improved spatial resolution would help with that?
As I showed, actually, to be honest, I have no clear idea how the flux guys gonna use the high spatial resolution data set into their research, but we would hope they're gonna figure out the innovations, so how they use the high spatial resolution data set for their own research. But maybe you tell me.
Second question. So early on, you showed SOS is at 50% of the amplitude, and then later you showed green up, mid green up at 50%. So do you think it's necessary to provide green up and then mid green up instead of just SOS?
Actually, when you look at our paper and all the LSP product, we do provide all the timing from the 15, 50, 90, and then again the 90, 50, and 15 for green down. So even if there are some kind of analysis, the estimate, for example, 15% or 50% is which one is better agreement with the kind of flux or any timing measured from the flux tower. But we do provide some of estimates, but we don't have the clear idea which one is have more meaning with some of things measured from the flux tower or something else. So
so SOS equals mid green up on that 50.
We just say that for the 15% of green up, we say just green up, and then for the 50% of green up, we so scale mid green up. But actually, if you ask me what are the differences in the physiology of forest or something else, there's no clear answer for me. Sorry.
But early on in XYZ's papers, Xiaoyang Zhang's papers, so there's just SOS, right? Or in many papers, there's just SOS. So would SOS be close to mid green up in your algorithm?
The difference is the algorithm we've used and then Xiaoyang Zhang used is that Xiaoyang Zhang used the conventional lay. They detect the conventional lay based on the rate of the change, but our algorithm just apply the amplitude threshold. So actually based on based on my personal analysis, the greenup from the Xiaoyang-Zhang's algorithm and then amplitude, the 15% of the amplitude during the greenup has a best match with the curvature, the estimated greenup.
Say 15?
Yeah,
15?
I would say 15, yes.
Okay, so one last
I don't know
question.
why,
Quick
but,
question. So how did you pick the 104 sites amongst the 500-ish sites?
I try to include every site, and it has a data from the valid data since the 2016 or 2017. So that's why I only use the 104 sites.
So you mean other sites did not have as much data as these sites?
Yeah. Some of site, as you know, some of site has no data, so not active now. Yeah,
okay.
so
And
that's why we excluded the other sites. Yeah.
Is it also due to cloud contamination?
Sorry, cloud.
Was it also due to cloud contamination?
I don't think so. That's not a reason why we used only 104 sites. Every site has cloud. Every world has a cloud. So yeah, we do not have to exclude any site due to cloud. Yeah.
So did you exclude those cloud contaminated dots and fit it?
No, actually we just use the quality assurance data layer in the PlanetScope, the imagery named UMD and UMD2 layers. We use those two layers to exclude all the bad pixels and then cloud contaminated, the snow contaminated. Even if in the algorithm, our own algorithm has their own the processes to further exclude such the potentially the cloud or the snow contaminated pixels.
Thank you, Mark. Mark is sending a message in the chat. I'll follow up with you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's just right. I don't know. I guess I think I use my entire thesis for those kind of guys. So it does, but I don't know. Super random. Sorry, I'm just like I'm asking that. That's a big flaw in such a urban environment. It's just that it's very dynamically system and everyone says that like that's real
No, you're right.
그쵸.
너무 나던데 여기 안에 있으면 좀더
조인.
안녕하세요. 안녕하세요.
안녕하세요.
네, 못 가서 죄송해요.
네, 아유 일단
네,
그래도 이렇게
수고하세요. 네.
네.
In case, I think I sent my slide to you, so my computer seems like it's not working really well. So
Okay.
in case it doesn't work, then could you open the?
Okay, let me set that up.
여기서 올리기 뭐가 있나요?
Yes, I will try. I think someone else should try sensor. Oh, do you want the USB? Personally, I think mine will work.
You think it will?
Oh,
Okay, we can just have mine as a backup.
Okay.
And did you, yeah, so then you want to try this on your end?
Okay. So do you want me to share the screen?
Yeah, let's do that. I don't know who's the first, oh, Russ is the first speaker, I think.
Who is the community?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that works.
Yeah, thank you.
Good.
Yeah, I will stop.
Are you sharing this?
I just stopped sharing my screen. Who is convening? Probably you.
Time to look it up. Oh, Gil and Youmi.
Thank you. Can I just use it or someone else is going
Yeah, which
Mine is the last one.
okay. Well, no one else has asked for it so far.
Okay.
But yeah, we can just leave it here and then you can stick it in when you need it.
Sounds good.
Okay, everyone. So now it's time for the second morning session. The theme for this session is general science. And we have first invited speaker, Russ Scott from USDA. So he'll be.
Russ, you were full screen for one moment.
Go full screen just a second here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Perfectly.
No, we can see you too.
Okay. Okay, does that look good?
Yeah, looking good.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to come speak to you and transport you out of that beautiful northern Michigan woods and lake environment, and have a little opportunity to talk about things that we've learned about dryland regions of North America down in the south here. I'd also like to acknowledge my PhD advisor and my mentor, Jim Shuttleworth, who passed away last year. Jim was very instrumental in getting eddy covariance measurements back in the 80s, going in the Amazon rainforest when they were looking about the effects of deforestation and the effects on evapotranspiration. He was a pioneer in developing new models of evaporation and also making these measurements in hard to make locations. Jim also moved on to actually carbon dioxide fluxes as well in the early 90s when he came to Arizona. He set up a site over the Sonoran Desert in this cactus forest region here to look at the fluxes in this region. He didn't continue this site after a couple of years, but if it would have kept going, it would have had as long a record as Harvard Forest. And then also he was instrumental in helping me get measurements going both in my PhD and after my PhD and getting my first flux tower going here in this riparian woodland site in southern Arizona. So why study fluxes in dryland regions? Well, water limitation is really important nearly everywhere on this planet. Like, if you look at this map produced a PET, the number of months where PET exceeds precipitation, you can see that water limitation is globally distributed, really. There's very few regions of the world that don't have some kind of water limitation for a number of months, if not all the months in the year. And so it's really important to understand what this water limitation means for carbon fluxes. Also, dryland carbon fluxes have been implicated as a strong determiner of the trend in the interannual variability of the global land carbon sink. So there's something happening here, and it'd be interesting to find out a little bit more. Also, there's really a kind of a historical lack in AmeriFlux, at least in prior decades. of dryland measurements. For example, looking at just the distribution of AmeriFlux sites here in the dark bars of mean annual precipitation and temperature versus the distribution of precipitation and temperature across the continental United States. And you can see that while drylands have a majority of, the distribution within the continental United States, the AmeriFlux representation in those areas was not as much as it was in the more mesic forest regions of the continent. And likewise, back in this map of early 2000 to 2004 AmeriFlux, there were very few measurements in the desert Southwest. I think I had one site, maybe 1 year of data at the time this map was produced. So, I looked at that map, I saw an opportunity. I was like, I want to stay here in Southern Arizona. I want to understand what semi-arid fluxes are all about. And so I started setting up flux towers throughout Southern Arizona. And in this region, we have a wide diversity of different land cover types, from savannas to grasslands, to mountain forests, to shrublands, and also riparian environments where groundwater is close to the surface and those plants can access water that typical upland environments do not. So that topography really creates a great diversity in the ecosystems in a relatively small amount of area. Nowadays, we have a number of these sites getting 15 to 20 years of data, so we can start to really unravel the interannual variability that's so important in dryland areas. So today I'm going to talk about the kind of three main messages of what we've learned over the last couple of decades of studying these fluxes and in this warm dryland regions. And that is really that there's a high variability both temporally and spatially in dryland fluxes, and that variability of water, or that relationship between water fluxes and carbon fluxes are very closely coupled in dryland regions. So just unpacking that temporal variability, here's an example of cumulative precipitation and cumulative net carbon uptake for the whole annual cycle at my Santa Rita mesquite site. It's a mesquite savanna, and showing here on the left the precipitation. The dashed lines indicate the spring cumulative precipitation, the long-term average, the summer long-term average, and then the annual total. And you can see that there are, within these, I don't know, about 16 years of data here, there's years of very high spring precipitation, there's years of very low spring precipitation. Likewise, in summer, there's years where their summer precipitation is double the average amount, and some years where it barely even records any measurement of precipitation. And that variability in precipitation creates an even greater variability in the net carbon exchange. You can see over here on the left with both carbon uptake and carbon release for the year, depending on the annual precipitation. So it's really important to understand what are these springs versus summer drivers of the annual carbon uptake. It's also important to understand this long-term variability in terms of what is changing in this environment, and how to strange, like extreme events and so on, might affect carbon cycling in these areas. We've also learned that interannual variability decreases with water availability. So if we use mean annual ET as a surrogate of water availability at a site, we can see that the water variability, or the coefficient of variation in ET declines with water availability, and that high variability in ET is even higher for GEP, or annual productivity. Likewise, high for respiration fluxes as well, but not as high as productivity. So really the limiting dryland resource is water, and that's because that's more variable than controls in like mesic regions, like say the amount of light or nutrients. That really gives rise to this high amount of variability in dryland regions. Also, we found on a temporal basis that the annual net carbon exchange tends to pivot at many of these sites between losses and gains, such that years of this is a plot of annual productivity and precipitation from 3 of my sites in southern Arizona. And you can see that there's this pivoting between positive net carbon uptake for the year when with years of higher precipitation, and then also years of carbon release when the precipitation is not as good. We've also found that this kind of pivot point of where the carbon balance pivots tends to be farther away from the mean annual precipitation at sites that have more grassy vegetation. So the grasslands tend to have a more of a higher propensity for taking in carbon at their mean annual precipitation, such that they can endure years of lower than average precipitation and still take in carbon, whereas the shrubland sites do not seem to be doing that. Now moving on to the spatial variability in the warm dry lands. This is a plot of, kind of hard to unpack. I wish I had a better plot to do this, but this is from Dave Moore at University of Arizona. And he looked at a 30-year simulation of community land model carbon fluxes, say on a 30-minute basis. And then he, at each pixel, he tried to correlate what the annual product, what the NEP was, the time series NEP was, how was it correlated to all the pixels within North America. And the pixels that were more correlated with their neighbors and with other pixels in North America had the highest correlation, shown in red. In blue, they had the least correlation, indicating that in Mexico and in the Southwest United States and these drier regions, and also regions of complex topography, we really don't have a good understanding or a good temporal coverage this region where we don't have a lot of flux tower information. This is the region that we really do need more flux towers and more information because of the high spatial variability. We've also backed that kind of plot up with this synthesis that Joel Biederman, my former postdoc and now colleague at ARS, put together across the Southwest US and Northwest Mexico. And he found this is just basically categorizing the NEP, the mean NEP, plus its standard deviation, plus or minus its standard deviation across this region. And we found that nearly half the sites tended to pivot between positive and negative and good and bad precipitation years. Whereas also we found sites that had persistent carbon sinks and also persistent carbon sources and in the magnitude similar to mesic forest ranges reported in the literature. So we do see this high spatial variability even in the data. What can explain this variability? Well, we find that water availability is in terms of ET, the amount of mean annual ET at the site, tends to have a pretty good relationship with the NEP across space, and that's shown in that spatial pattern or the red line drawn on this map. And then also on this map is the temporal variability at a site shown in the black lines. And you can see that all those slopes tend to have a similar relationship with water availability, and as well as it's similar to the spatial slope across the region. So water is a firm control of the variability both across space and temporally at a site. And now some of the remaining questions that we have are what can explain these kind of offsets from this mean spatial pattern? For example, why do we have sites that just tend to have a lot more carbon uptake than the spatial pattern suggests, or a lot more carbon release than the spatial pattern suggests? And we think it has something to do with site history and other information, that kind of BADM information that we don't often look at, and maybe that we could start to tie together, like how can we explain that there's these sites that just tend to lose more carbon than they should, or take in more carbon than we'd expect? What can explain those things? Is it fire history? Is it drought? what's going on in these regions. And then finally, looking at the coupling of the fluxes, again, we found a strong relationship between productivity and precipitation across the sites. This is this typical kind of saturating curve that you find of productivity and precipitation, where as you get to higher levels of precipitation, that response gets less. But if you plot that versus the evapotranspiration, which includes hydrological losses, so P minus runoff, then you get more of a linear response in productivity. So it's really important, we're finding, to consider these hydrological losses when looking at relationships between water availability and productivity. And we've also found that if we draw those temporal patterns, slopes are very similar across each site, indicating that there's kind of a common efficiency across sites in the way those sites produce carbon for a given amount of water. And finally, the satellites and land surface models really do not capture this dry land variability. For example, here's the MODIS GEP product versus the tower GEP, again, showing those temporal lines and the spatial line. You can see that the MODIS GEP tends to capture the spatial pattern pretty well, but the temporal slopes are way off. So MODIS really underpredicts the temporal variability by about 70% or so of what we're finding in the measurements. And likewise, the models, this is just an example of one of the trendy models, but Natasha McBean has looked at all of them and found that NEP, model NEP is just really flat compared to the variability, both temporally and spatially, that we find here in the warm drylands of North America. Her and her postdoc are finding out things about looking at the models, soil moisture stress, hydrology, and phenology that tend to be associated with this underprediction of the variability. And oftentimes these models are uncalibrated with any kind of flux data. But if you calibrate them, you can get much better representations of what's going on here. So finally, just my take-home message, we have high temporal and spatial variability in annual fluxes in this region. That really necessitates the need to have more flux sites in dryland regions where they're very spatially heterogeneous, they have complex site histories, as well as long-term tower records to begin understanding how do we explain this interannual variability at a site. And not just measure for a few years and think that we have an understanding of what the system is. Likewise, those systems tend to be very well coupled with water availability. That explains a lot, and that does help to simplify the problem somewhat. So we really live in an era now with longer flux tower records, more dryland flux sites throughout the world now. Like I've just kind of highlighted that global map again, with just kind of an idea for me in my head about where a lot of dryland carbon cycling work is being done. Hopefully we can now start to integrate it more globally across all these regions and start to put together syntheses that allow us to understand, like, how does dryland carbon fluxes in Australia differ from in the Southwest region, and likewise in other regions throughout the world. Finally, I'd just like to encourage you all to continue sharing your data, making that effort to produce high quality data, to get it out there in AmeriFlux. It's really been, I think this paper shows that it really tends to benefit people who share data. It allows you access to a lot of studies and creative uses of your data that you never thought even imagined available, like Paul Stoy's like carbon fluxes everywhere all the time. Kind of blows my mind. And then, so this data really does get used all over the world. So like at most of my sites, I get over 4,000 to 5,000 shares of that data within the last 3 or 4 years. Finally, now that flux data is free and there's satellite data and everything, what's the motivation for getting outside, making these hard to make measurements? well, I can see it's a beautiful day up in Michigan, and that's motivation enough to get outside, but there's all kinds of exciting things going on out there. And that if you get outside and make these measurements, you really start to understand what's going on in the system more than just looking at a data plot in MATLAB. So, and plus it's really exciting. It's really fun. You get to see all kinds of interesting reptiles and animals and vegetation out there on the landscape. Finally, just put in a plug again. We're putting together a 25-year AmeriFlux special issue. Really welcome contributions from sites all around the AmeriFlux world, and would love to hear and find out more about what you're doing in this special issue. And that's it for today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we have time for more questions. If you have any questions, please go ahead. Yeah, Margaret.
Hey, Russ, thank you. Margaret, can you hear?
Yes, I can hear.
Great. So for what you were calling the pivot, or what is the pivot between source and sink, can you say a little bit more about the relative change in the GPP component or the respiration component? What do you think is doing the most pivoting there?
Yeah, we find that pivot in the net productivity is due mainly to the gross photosynthesis rather than the respiration. The respiration response tends to be flatter than the productivity response. So it's really driven by changes in productivity.
Maybe Russ can read there's some questions in the chat, I think.
Yeah, you can answer in the chat.
Okay. Let's see here.
Yeah, you might have to stop sharing. Otherwise it's much easier.
Yes, I agree. We do need more information about the southern part of North America. It's there's a lot of different ecosystems down there that are just not covered at all in any kind of flux database. So yeah, there definitely would be wonderful to see that. On the slide with the lizard in the bottom right, there appears to be a white substance completely coating the mounting hardware. Oh, wow. Bottom left. Sorry, let me look. Well, I have had vultures roost on my site before, so I hope it wasn't the vulture shot of vulture poop, which is quite odoriferous. So I hope it wasn't that. And it might have been the substance that we've heard about called snow, but we don't really see very often. I think that's it.
Yeah. Thanks, Ross. Yeah, so next up is Linnia Hawkins from Oregon State University. So Linnia, if you're ready, please take it away.
Okay, is that in full screen?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you all for being here. Oops, just a minute. There we go. I'm going to talk about a study today that my colleagues and I have been working on to examine the relative importance of soil hydraulic functions and their role in regulating ecosystem drought stress responses in land process models. The previous talk was a nice introduction to, why water, capturing water stress response really influences the carbon cycling in ecosystems. But our models tend to not do a very good job of representing how water stress actually limits that carbon uptake. And that's been shown in a host of different studies. Historically, there was just a simple function that downregulates somatic conductance based on the soil water content. But more recently, there's been a widespread effort to advance how we represent plant hydraulics in Earth system models. First, we've moved towards using still models that assume that plants are trying to optimize a trade-off between carbon gain and avoiding some hydraulic stress. But then we've also incorporated a more physiologically based representation of how water actually moves through these systems, showing along that gradient of water potentials from the soil to the atmosphere, where we represent each plant component, the roots, stems, and leaves, with specific relationships between how their conductivity and the tensions that those segments are under. And then lastly, as we've been making these advancements, there's been a real goal of trying to make sure that the parameters in these new versions are representative of something measurable, of a measurable plant trait or soil property. So I've listed a few, recent land surface models have incorporated these advancements, but there's many others. But the three sort of primary components that these advancements have acted on are the stomatal model, the plant hydraulic traits, and then the soil properties. And all of these three processes interact to improve how we represent water stress. So with this study, we wanted to ask, what is the relative influence of those three components, the stomatal models, the plant hydraulic traits, and the soil hydraulic properties on how our models are actually representing evapotranspiration. So the AmeriFlux network and NEON networks provide a really great work environment to address these kind of questions. So we went to 4 sites in the summer of 2021 to collect some plant traits and soil cores and other data to inform our models. We went to the Metolius AmeriFlux site, which is in Central Oregon, dominated by ponderosa pine. We went to the lower tea kettle site, where we just focused on Jeffrey pine and white pine. Wind River, which is in southwestern Washington, has primarily Douglas fir and western hemlock. And then the Yellowstone site, which is in Yellowstone National Park, we sampled Douglas fir and lodgepole pine. So we collected a lot of different plant traits, VC max, some stand information, soil cores, but we also collected branches, roots, and leaves so that we could perform plant hydraulic vulnerability curves to inform our models. So this is done by putting the different segments under tension and looking at how much loss in conductivity there is at these different segments, tensions, excuse me. So just for those who aren't familiar with these, ponderosa and other pines tend to be more, lose more conductivity quicker at less negative water potentials. Those are the dashed lines here. Whereas other species can actually maintain quite a bit of conductivity, even at really low water potentials. So these species, the pines, tend to be more drought avoidant and more on the isohydric end of the spectrum. We also collected soil cores in order to get soil water retention curves. We collected intact soil cores at 3 different soil horizons at each site. And there was 3 to 5 pits per site. So not a broad representation of the spatial heterogeneity, but just to get a better sense for sort of the difference between these soil water retention functions using our measurements versus just the soil texture. So we collect the intact soil cores. We use the ceramic plate method to deduce the soil water retention curves. For this method, you saturate the core, place it on these ceramic plates, and then hold it at pressure until it reaches equilibrium, and then just weigh the core so that you have a relationship between pressure it was under and the remaining soil water content. Now there are better methods. The HyProp does a better job at the dry end of the spectrum. So I think there's improvements that can be made here, but these are just the tools that were available to us in the lab. So with that data, which are the points shown in this plot that relate soil water content to soil water potential, we still need to fit a curve to that so that we can apply that in our models. And most Earth system models use one of these two models for representing the soil water retention curves. The Van Genupten is commonly used, and then the Brooks-Corey as well. So we fit these two equations to our data for each site and each horizon. And that's shown in the dashed lines here. You see they're pretty identical, except for near the porosity, where the Van Genupten has a more gradual transition and the Brooks-Corey function is abrupt. So, this is great when you have this data available, but when we use our models at global scales, we have to estimate these parameters. And what's commonly done is just taking the soil texture type, the sand, silt, clay percentages, and relating that using pedotransfer functions to relate that soil texture to the parameters used in these water retention curve functions. So for some examples, for the Brooks-Corey, there's a Clapp-Hornberger relationship that's commonly used, or for Van Genupten, we used the Torakavi et al. 2010 pedotransfer functions for that soil type. So I refer to those as just Brooks-Corey is BC. If it's fit to the data, fit. Clapp-Hornberger is CH, and then the Torakavi et al. Is VGT. So those are our four different fits to the soil water retention curves. And we applied those in the profit maximization model, which was Anna spoke about earlier this morning. This model takes an approach where they assume that plants try to maximize their carbon gain while avoiding some hydraulic risk, and that optimum determines where their model conductance is set at. The hydraulic risk is based on the vulnerability curves for these segments and the water status along that pathway. And then the soil water retention curves are typically represented with Van Genupten, but we're going to apply these four different ones that we measured. For our model simulations, now we prescribed the soil water content at all four sites just to avoid feedbacks between, if the soil water retention function has a less negative water potential, it might reduce the ET, and then there would be more available soil water content later in the year. So to avoid those feedbacks, we prescribed soil water content. We also then performed a control simulation with no water limitations. And that, so this example is shown here, the neon eddy covariance measurements are shown in the solid black line. Our control simulation is this dashed upper edge line. And then when we use the soil water retention curves, that's the blue dashed line here. And so the response variable I'm going to talk about in the results section in just a minute is what I'm calling delta ET. It's this shaded area. So it's the cumulative difference in evapotranspiration between a control simulation with no water stress and the water stress that was induced by incorporating the plant hydraulic functions and the soil water retention curves. And then, so lastly, we sampled vulnerability curves for branches and roots of 8 individual trees for each species and each site. And so these are what across 8 different individuals, those vulnerabilities curves can look quite different. So that P50 value might be quite different. So we're in this first analysis, we're comparing the influence of the individual vulnerability curves compared to the individual soil water retention curves. Okay, so jumping into some results. First, I'm starting with the Matolia site. That was the Central Oregon site that is dominated by ponderosa pine. Though here's what the water retention curves look like for that site. The ponderosa pine is what I was just showing on the last slide. These are the hydraulic vulnerability curves for branches. And so then when we perform the simulations with each combination of all of these and can look at that delta ET. So that, again, it's the change in cumulative ET during the growing season from the control run. So about minus 20% or so here. And there's really big differences between the different soil water retention curves we used. So the two Brooks-Corey curves and the Van Genooten functions. There's very little difference between the ones that are fit to data. So Brooks-Corey and Van Genooten fit to data are almost identical. Whereas when we use parameters based on the soil texture type, we can get really different total ET, simulated total ET. And importantly, the variability across water retention curves is much larger than the variability across plant hydraulic vulnerability curves here. That's what's represented in the variability in the box plots. Similar results for the other sites. Here's Yellowstone. They had lodgepole pine on the top, Douglas fir on the bottom. Again, the soil water retention curve chosen really dominates the variability. Douglas fir are also, the cross individual trees of the vulnerability curves is actually pretty tight. There's not, the P50 values are pretty close to one another for this site and this species. So there's very little variability due to the plant vulnerability curves that were used. So Wind River has a little bit of a different story. This site is almost never water limited. It's a very wet coastal forest. And while the VPD does get quite high, there's just plenty of soil water available. And so there's almost no difference between the control simulation without water stress and the simulations with the curves. So we didn't detect any difference here. And that just emphasizes that the soil water regime that these sites are in really dictate when the plant and soil hydraulic functions actually play a role. And then lastly, the Tea Kettle site had similar results as the other water limited sites. It gets quite dry in the late growing season here, where we do see fairly large differences due to the choice of soil water retention curves for both Jeffrey pine and white fir. So that's just emphasizes that it's really important. We pay a lot of attention to our plant traits, but it's also important to notice how influential the soil water properties are that we are incorporating in these models. But I wanted to extend this work to look at not just the parameters used, the plant vulnerability parameters, those P50 values, but extend that to other stomodal models as well, and see if the stomodal model is more influential than the soil water retention function. So to do that, we implemented 3 different stomodal models into, well, first into the SPA model, which is a multi-layer canopy model. We used the Medellin stomodal model with where we incorporated hydraulic stress by downregulating this stomodal slope parameter as a function of the leaf water potential. And then there's also a model that optimizes the water use efficiency. It assumes plants maximize their water use efficiency while trying to avoid some minimum leaf water potential, or like where cavitation or hydraulic failure might occur. And then the third model is the one I introduced already, which assumes plants try to maximize their carbon gain while avoiding hydraulic risk. And so just for the sake of time, I'm just going to show the Yellowstone site, but that delta ET value is really similar across models because they're all tuned. I was able to tune them all first. So we're assuming that the parameters that are associated with the stomatal model can be tuned so that they are more equivalent. You can get similar performance across these stomatal models. But we can't, but the variability due to the soil hydraulic model is much larger. It really dominates. So our takeaway from this is that the choice of soil water retention function can be as or more influential on our simulated evapotranspiration than the choice of stomatal model. That was similar results for Douglas fir. The Brooks quarry with the Clapp-Hornberger parameters really had a much lower, allowed soil water potentials to get much more negative. Okay, so just to repeat those takeaways, our findings illustrate that modeled ET is more sensitive to soil hydraulic parameters than plant hydraulic traits, but that relative sensitivity really varied by site and by species. And then second, the choice of hydraulic model was as influential as the choice of plant hydraulic model or stomatal model on simulated ET. And just some considerations that we aren't really sampling this full spatial heterogeneity, and the soils are likely much more diverse than we were able to capture with just a few soil cores. These models really don't represent soil structure well, so it's another area for more attention and improvement. The soil moisture regime really mattered, right? If in the wet sites where it never really gets drought stressed, the soil water retention function wasn't as influential. We might want to consider looking at alternate drought metrics, something that looks at more rapid dry down to a precipitation pulse event, for example. And again, I'm only looking at a couple water retention curves and a couple stomatal models, but this might be more diverse when we expand to look at other model representations as well. So with that, I just like to acknowledge my field team, who is really crucial to making this work happen. Funding source from NSF, and of course the AmeriFlux and NEO network for really making this work possible. My contacts information is there, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Linnia. So we have we can take one question. And yeah, I see comments in the chat from can you yeah, if you can, if you can answer query, we can also take questions from others. I think we all want to raise it.
I posted a quick, can you hear me, Linnia?
I can, yeah.
Great talk. What was the sensitivity of the model to the vulnerability curves? Like how are those vulnerability curves incorporated into the model?
Right, so we ran the model with each vulnerability curve from the 8 individual trees that we sampled, and that was much narrower than the choice of soil water retention function. So the vulnerability curves directly determine the conductivity of that plant segment at different water tensions, and the variability across our measurements was much narrower than the variability due to different soil water retention functions.
Cool, thank you.
So I think there's one more question. Yeah, Linnia Hawkins. So could you take a quick question from Linnia Hawkins?
Yeah, for some species, there are a lot of variations within species in terms of the vulnerability curves. But for other species, there's not much variation. Why is there such a larger difference across species?
Yeah, some species have very consistent expressions of their genetics, and others can have much more variability in that. So, and in addition to that, I just want to also say that measuring the vulnerability curves in like a pine is much more challenging than in like a fir. And so due to that, there's just more measurement error also in the pines. They tend to snap in the centrifuge, so there is some higher variability in pines in the measurement itself than in some of the other types of species.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think we need to move on. So yeah, thank you, Linnia, for your talk. Next up is team talk by Angela Lafuente, Tyler Roman, and Jhon Rengifo. Yeah, sorry if I pronounce your name incorrectly.
That's okay. Can you see the slideshow?
Yes.
Is this right?
I'm seeing the picture. Yeah, now I can see the.
That's better.
Screen.
Okay, Tyler.
Okay. Thank you, Kuhn. Good morning, everyone. My name's Tyler Roman. I'm with the U.S. Forest Service, and this is a team talk presented by myself, along with Angela from Michigan Technological University, and John from the Institute of Investigations of the Amazonian Peru. And we wanted to thank the rest of our team listed here. We'll be talking to you all today about soil and stem carbon dioxide and methane fluxes of an Amazonian palm peatland, which you can see in the background here. So I'll turn it over to John to give a little background on our project.
Hello, everyone. Let's start by saying that the peatlands are a very important ecosystem, storing carbon as well as participating in many processes to purify the water and air, which improve the quality of life of human beings. They cover about 1/3 of Earth's surface, but they can store twice as much carbon as the whole world forest. A group of these are found in the tropical zone, which we don't understand better or we are understudied, but all our effort is concentrated on it now. The Loreto region in Peruvian Amazon contains about 63,000 square kilometers of peatlands, and where is our study area is located, just a few kilometers from the big city of Iquitos. Next slide, please, Tyler. In this slide, we show the Aguajal of Quistococha, where in 2016, we established a eddy covariance flux tower to better understanding the behavior of the Aguajal. Aguajal is a swamp palm ecosystem dominated by Aguaje maurita flexosa palms tree. We also important to say that average peep deep is 2 meters. So we are talking about 700 tons of carbon per hectare stored in the soil. Therefore, knowing this ecosystem helps us to mitigate the climate change. Next slide, please. In 2021, we installed an automatic chamber-based system in order to measure the carbon dioxide and methane fluxes from the soil and tree stems using a Lycor system. In the footprint of eddy tower, we identify a circular plot of 15-meter radius that contains the most abundant plant species of the site, represented by 4 Maurita flexuosas, Aguaje, 2 Tabebuyas insignis, and 2 Mauritiellas aculeata, which were constantly measured. In case of the soil measurement, first, we install collars and fluorescence system on the soil in order to cover the spatial variability of the site. After a few days and the soil recovery and stabilize, we install the long-term opaque chambers. In the selected plants, we installed aqueous opaque chambers to feed the stem up 50 centimeter height with ventilation system fed by air pumps which allow flushing. Before installing and sealing, we remove the fungus carefully without damage to the stems. In addition, we installed 2 stem chambers at 90 centimeters height on 2 of Staudium Maurito Frescosa's aguaje species. Now, Angela and Tyler will show what we found.
So good morning. In this slide, we show the daily means and the standard error of the mean. On the 2 top figures are these soil fluxes and stem fluxes on the bottom figures, methane on the left and CO2 on the right side. As Jhon mentioned, we established 8 soil chambers, but it's really challenging working in the Amazon, and the very harsh conditions in the field keep damaging our instruments in general, but in particular the soil chambers that have lots of mechanics and moving parts. We also installed, beginning the experiment, 8 tree chambers, but all these problems have made that we have gaps in our data, and that we have been removing some of the soil chambers and increasing the amount of tree chambers that we have. And here we are showing all the measurements that we have, and this data has been pre-processed. We are showing only fluxes where the R-square is above greater than 0.9. And we also removed some fluxes that are clear evolution events, but the data has not been gap filled. And you can see there some issues with the instruments when they go down. Next slide. In here, we are looking for deal patterns. On the top left, we see little variations throughout the day on the methane soil fluxes. On the bottom left, methane fluxes from stems show small peaks, or could be some of the chambers, could be showing some small peaks on the central hours of the day. And then when we check the CO2 on the right side, the top figure shows the dial patterns on soil chambers, and a couple of the chambers show a peak on the central hours of the day. And all our tree chambers show on CO2 fluxes a clear peak in the central hours of the day. Next.
And so, while the focus of this presentation is on the chamber fluxes, it made sense to look at the eddy covariance fluxes as well when doing some of the analysis. So here we show on the left-hand side, the top panel, the methane flux, and then bottom panel, CO2 NEE flux. These are daily mean and standard error of the mean. And these data points have been quality controlled and filtered, but not gap filled. So on the left-hand side, you can see the fluxes, and then on the right-hand side, we have the partition CO2 flux. So respiration on the top and GPP on the bottom. That partitioning was done in the R-eddyproc package using the daytime method of Laszlo et al. And so one thing to point out, those of you that are used to temperate or boreal ecosystems are used to seeing, the leaf out and leaf off. You don't see that here. It's pretty consistent throughout the year. Not a whole lot of seasonality. Although I should point out that all of the data we're showing so far are from the wet season in this region of the Amazon. And so looking at the dial patterns of the eddy covariance data, like we did with the chamber data, we can see for the methane flux, there's not a whole lot of a significant dial pattern here. There's a bit more variability at night, which we attribute to maybe lower friction velocities and possible changes in the storage term that we're going to investigate more moving forward. And then on the bottom, we have the CO2 NEE flux following what you would expect, respiration at night, and then during the day, GPP driving CO2 uptake. And on the right-hand side, the partition fluxes, again, showing what you would expect to peak around midday for both respiration and GPP. And then bringing all of this together, so top two panels are stem chambers, middle are soil chambers, and the bottom, the eddy covariance fluxes. And do note that there are varying y-axes on all of these plots, and we wanted to do that just so that you could actually see the trends in the data. There's different magnitudes on the different components. So if we used one unified axis, it was hard to differentiate much. And something else that we should point out is all of these stem fluxes are per unit surface area of the stem and have not been converted to soil area. But that's something we're going to look into moving forward so that we can look at the soil and stem relative to the eddy covariance fluxes better. But again, as Angela pointed out, for the stem fluxes, we do see a peak around midday for CO2, maybe the same for a few of the species for the methane flux. And here we have averaged across the species, whereas before the plot that Angela showed was showing each individual chamber. Here we've averaged across the species and then all of the soil together as well. And so then for the soil flux, midday higher fluxes in general for both CO2 and methane than in the evening. And the eddy covariance fluxes, again, kind of what I just mentioned on the previous slide. And so we've shown you just kind of what the data looks like and the diode patterns, but obviously important context are the environmental conditions for the study period. So as I mentioned before, this is all the data from the wet season. So in the top left-hand panel, you can see the water table depth that we're measuring at the site. And everything's above zero so far, although, you know, there was a kind of a dry down period at the very beginning of the year. And now if you look at the end of the figure in late August, we're starting to drop down again. And typically in this region, the dry season is September and October, although it does vary a bit year by year. So we do think that we're presently entering the dry season at the moment. And precipitation, you can see it's been quite wet throughout the year, as you would expect in the Amazon. And then on the right-hand side, on the top, we have air temperature, the red dots being from the top of the canopy or above the canopy where the eddy covariance instrumentation is located. And then the green is sub-canopy where the chambers are. And lastly, in the bottom right, soil temperature, you can see the green dots are what we have measured at the site. As Angela mentioned, the conditions in the Amazon are not favorable for instrumentation. So we've had issues with our soil sensors and data logger, which is why we have such poor data coverage here. And so we've had to rely on some reanalysis data. And so the red data points here are from the ERA data set for this region. And you can see that there is some matchup in terms of the trends between our site and the reanalysis data, at least for these couple periods where it drops down to lower temperatures. However, the ERA data currently is only compiled through the end of June, so it doesn't cover our entire data set, so it wasn't included in much of the further analysis here. Although I should mention our soil data logger has been repaired and is on the way back down. So we look forward to getting that back up and running. And so bringing this all together, here we have on the left-hand panels, the methane flux, and on the right, the CO2 NEE. And then the top panels are the relationship with air temperature, and bottom is the relationship with water table depth. So we see here there is a significant correlation for the methane fluxes with both air temperature and water table depth. And the relationship with the CO2 fluxes is not significant. And again, it's worth noting here that, you know, we're in the dry season. We've captured a relatively small range. So as we move into the dry season, we expect that, you know, the x-axes in these figures will expand. And so we'll see how these correlations play out as we obtain more data into the dry season. And so now I'll turn it back over to Angela to talk more about some of the chamber data.
Yeah, so here coming back to the chambers and correlating the fluxes from the dark chambers, because we haven't mentioned that before, but we use opaque chambers, so we only measure soil respiration. We observe that CO2 on the right side of the figure correlates with water table position and air temperature for all the tree species studied. And the methane correlates with water table and air temperature, but only for two of the studied species, Mauritia and Tabebuya. None of the two studied heights, Mauritia, in Mauritia showed any significant correlation with the environmental variables. Next. Okay, and here we observe again the average fluxes by tree species and soil. I forgot to mention that, but Tyler pointed out the differences in the axis between soil and tree fluxes, and that these are by tree surface, but they are not converted into soil surface. But we wanted to point here that we observe that despite trees have a smaller flux compared to soils, we observe a significant methane fluxes in all the tree species, and the fluxes depends on the tree species. Next. And as you have noticed, we studied two different heights on Mauritia. All our chambers were established at 50 centimeters. But on Mauritia, we also measure at 90 centimeters high. And this is because we did a pre-test and took measurements at 4 different heights on Mauritius. And we observed a peak at 90 centimeters. So we started establishing all our chambers at 50. But then we decided to go below that, as close as we could to the soil, go to 90 and 140 centimeters. And so we observed that on 90 centimeters, the fluxes were greater. And then when we keep going up on the trees, the fluxes decrease again. So we decided to, that was a manual measurement that we took once, but we decided to maintain those and include some automatic chambers and measure throughout the whole wet season to monitor if this was a trend happening throughout the season. And these are the results. We indeed have greater fluxes at 90 centimeters and are significant, bigger than those at 50 centimeters. We still do not have a good explanation for these, but we think it could have something to do with the soil moisture. But yeah, we need to keep working on this and figure out if this is a trend that happens in other trees or not. Next slide. So our take-home message from these studies that there are a significant correlation between both eddy covariance and chambers with the water table position and the air temperature. But as we have mentioned several times, the data set that we have, it only contains wet season, and we are now moving into the dry season. That we observe a similar dial pattern for eddy covariance and chambers on CO2 fluxes. However, neither shows a particular methane dial pattern. And that the methane fluxes from stems are significant and vary by species. Our next steps are the addition of a profile system for Lagrangian canopy analysis that we already installed, and we are starting to get some data. We took inlets at 40, 30, 25, 20, 15, 10, and 5 and 1 meter throughout the tower that we have on site. And we install another sonic at 10 meters. We are getting allometric data to scale up for stem flux data. We will continue investigating the vertical distribution of the stem fluxes. And as you can see, and Tyler mentioned before in the figure in the slide, you can see that the red is the last year data and green is this year. And we are currently entering, we are following the same pattern as last year. And so we are entering the dry season. So we will evaluate whether these, there are changes in fluxes with the change in season. And yeah. We want to thank AmeriFlux for lending us at $7,500 to keep the site in operation while our instrument is back in the US for repair, to the DOE for funding of this project, and all the other organizations that support this research. And we are happy to answer any questions that you have.
Angela and Tyler and John. So yeah, we can take a couple of questions. Yes.
It's more common, but I'm trying to get my head around your absolute flux magnitude, and I'm not at all familiar with this kind of wetland or the vegetation or the nutrient status of it, and probably very few sites that don't have it. But is my overall impression is a little bit that it's for wetland on the lower range of methane fluxes. So is that something that you've thought about, or is it something that you expected? Or is it this? I mean, it's the first year of measurement, right? So it's probably have to put that in perspective.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that all that well. It was kind of in and out. So, sorry.
Or
to this? Okay. I was just wondering if you can comment on the, or if this. So I'm a little bit, I mean, I'm not familiar with this type of wetland, but from the literature values that are available, can you comment on the range of the absolute magnitude of the fluxes that you measure? Is that something that you expected to see, or is that it just we know so little about these systems that it's not possible to comment on that? I mean, I'm just thinking it's for a wetland, it's a little bit on the low side of methane fluxes. So I'm curious if you've thought about that, or if there are nutrient reasons or biochemical reasons for that.
So yeah, fluxes, in this particular site, there is another work published where they have studied tree fluxes. Our tree fluxes are lower than the soil fluxes. Soil fluxes are within range of other studies carried on this site, which are lower than other peatlands, but not different to what has been measured on site. But there are many studies yet in here. And what we can see, our fluxes are within range.
Thank you. Yeah, we are now in time, so we'll move on. So our last speaker is Youmi from NOAA. You need
how can I say? Oh.
Your computer. Move your computer.
Oh, my
computer
is fucking. Yep. Hi, everyone. My name is Youmi. I'm a postdoc at NOAA Global Monitoring Laboratory. I'm working on carbon tracker methane, which is an inversion system of methane with my advisor, Dr. Lori Grunweiler. Yeah. But before getting into my talk, I will have a 5 minutes brief introduction of my lab and the data that you can actually use at our website. And I will have a very short presentation of my talk, so it will be quick so we can have lunch. So my lab, as I just mentioned, is NOAA Global Monitoring Laboratory. I don't know how many of you know it, but like we have a very long-term measurement of air gas. So we also have a annual meetings, and we also had a big anniversary. It was our 50th annual conference this May. We have this history because we have this continuous in situ measurement started in the early 1970s and it's extended to the more than 50 sites around the world in 1980s. So we have a very long-term measurement of gas. So if you come to our website, you can actually download this data. So this is all our, this is the map of where our measurements located. You can see a lot of it is in the US, but throughout the whole globe, you can see there are continuous measurements. And these four are our 4 baseline observatory. We have staff there every time. Sparrow, Mauna Loa, American Samoa, and South Pole. So these are our ground measurements. So basically, we get the air samples from these sites 2 weeks every year, and then we bring the air sample to our lab in Boulder. Then we analyze the sample. So we basically analyze about 55 trace gases. And also we have aircraft and balloon and power measurement, especially in the US. So if you are working at a US flight, I think you can use our measurement too. So this is the example when you get into our website, gml.noaa.gov.db and IADB. You can see all of this sites. But I will just show you one example in Mauna Loa. You can see carbon cycle gases from 1970 to present. So it includes CO2, methane, CO, and nitrous oxide, SF6, and other gases, and also halocarbon, trace gases, aerosol, solar radiation, ozone, and meteorology. So yeah, all the data is available, publicly available, so you can come in and then get the data. Also, another product that we have is this global monthly mean CO2. So we use a lot of our marine boundary layer site measurement, and we get this globally mean CO2, and it's monthly updated. So this is what I got just yesterday, and you can see this CO2 concentration global mean in June 2020. You can also get the data for methane. I think I explained a little bit about this methane interesting long-term trend yesterday at our breakout session. You can see this methane has some interesting long-term trend that there is no increase from 2000 to 2006. And from 2007, we saw this really rapid increase in atmospheric methane. And last year, we published a news article a few months ago when we showed that the methane growth in 2021 and 2020 during the pandemic year was the largest since we had a measurement started in 1983. And we don't know the reason, so it's pretty interesting topic, and we are working on it. Another product I think is more relevant to you is our inversion product. So basically, we use our in situ measurement and run the atmospheric model. So we run an inversion model and try to estimate the global grid size CO2 emission. So it's a top-down estimation of the CO2 emissions. And I think we have final resolution in the US. So these are really categorized to land, fire, ocean, fossil. So yeah, you can use our top-down results when you compare your bottom-up results. And we are also working on the carbon tracker methane. I am in charge of this project with my advisor, Lori. I think we have some prototype website. We will publish the website pretty soon. So please stay tuned. Yeah, back to my talk, it will be short, but this is my one of my side projects that I have been working on. It's continuation of my PhD work actually. So the title is Revising Global Methane Soil Sink by Considering High Affinity Methanotropes. So this is a global methane emission estimated by top-down, as a lot of you are working on bottom up, and and then top down is what inversion is estimating. You can see there are mainly 4 categories where methane is from. First one is agriculture and waste, another one is fossil, another is biomass burning, and natural resources. You can see bottom up and top down are pretty comparable for agriculture waste, fossil, and biomass burning, but there is a big discrepancy for natural resources. So basically bottom models overestimate the methane source. And this GCP report show that it's because of the overestimated aquatic sources, such as like double counting. However, for here, this study, we argue that this can be also partially reduced by underestimated soil sink. So basically there is a bacteria in soil that actually eat methane, and we think that is underestimated. So the current model estimation of this global soil sink is about 30 teragram per year. And you can see the map from this GCP project here, but there is a large uncertainty. So you can see this estimation from observation and models. And some studies from the observation, they show that the mean is about 30, but the variation is really big, from 7 to more than 100 teragram per year. So it is really uncertain. And I think it's important to accurately estimate the soil sink to reduce the bottom up and top down gap. So I have been studying this bacteria, high affinity methanotroph, and the current methane models do not consider this bacteria. So I will explain a little bit about it. So in wetland, there is a methanogen, as you know, it produces methane in anaerobic soils, and some of the methane is diffused to the aerobic soil zone. It is oxidized by land, called low affinity methanotroph, that eats methane, but it cannot eat all, so the rest of it is going to the atmosphere. So this wetland becomes net methane source. Whereas in the upland, dry soil, there's a special bacteria called high affinity methanotroph. High affinity, so it has high affinity to low methane concentration. So basically this bacteria can survive and grow at very low methane concentration, 2 ppm, which is the atmospheric methane concentration. So by considering this, I published a paper back in 2020 in Nature Climate Change. We only study the Arctic. We include this high affinity methanotrophs microbial dynamics, and we found that after we include this bacteria and its microbial dynamics, we double the methane soil sink. So basically in Arctic, the soil oxidation is twice larger than the previous estimation. So we are also hypothesizing that this HEM can be also important underestimated global methane soil sink. So we are revising this global methane soil sink with 3 independent methods. First one is the process-based modeling that I did work on before. And the second one is machine learning, random forest, as Joey also presented. Another one is atmospheric modeling that I'm doing at NOAA. So I will explain each of them shortly, like 3 slides. And then the first one is the process-based model. For this, I use the terrestrial ecosystem model, HEM, that I used for my PhD. So I include this microbial dynamics of HEM, high affinity methanotroph, and optimize the methane oxidation process for globally different vegetation types, so for 8 different types. Result is pretty interesting. When we consider the HEM for all regions, then we see that the methane soil sink is really big, probably too big. So it's about 90 teragram per year, which is 3 times larger than it. There are 2 interesting regions. For example, in the desert, it's a Sahara desert. You don't expect that nothing is happening. Yeah, nothing is happening there. But actually, we did some research research, and we found that actually the Sahara desert and very low soil moisture condition, methanotroph can still survive. And some field studies say that this desert region can be up to like 7 teragram per year methane soil sink. But this is kind of big. And also in our Antarctica, there are some recent studies like from PNAS and others. They actually got the soil sample from the Antarctica, and they found that HEM lives here, lives in Antarctica, and also they are methane soil sink. But HEM does not live in all upland soil. So using some soil organic carbon and pH criteria, we have some other scenarios. So basically LEM only is our default, like previous model estimation about 30 teragram. And we have this mixture in the middle where LEM and HEM both exist. So we validate this model using 282 site soil sink data. This includes some data from AmeriFlux site. Most of the data is from the chambers. It's not the eddy covariance data, but we have some data from here, University of Michigan Biological Station. A lot of data is from Harvard Forest, some from Howland, Duke Forest, and some from Alaska, Bonanza Creek. And the results show that the middle scenario where the lamb and ham both exist, 60 teragram per year, match better with the observation. Whereas the lamb only model underestimate, ham only model overestimate the methane soil sink. We wanted to validate if our model actually works, so we used machine learning techniques. So we collected data. Now it's more than 8,700 points, but by that time it was about 8,700 monthly data points. We got it from other researchers, and then we used this input parameters, vegetation, meteorology, soil properties, and others. We tested multiple different tree-based model, decision tree, random forest, but we eventually chose random forest because it has the chi-star square. So this is some kind of training and testing example that we have with the random forest. To the top, we use this 5-port cross-validation method. So basically, we have this large data set. We sample them randomly 20% for our training, testing, and another 80% was for training. And you can see the top row is the training data, higher R square, lower RMSE, and the lower one is the testing. It's not bad. So we use this trained model and then it's extrapolated to the whole globe. And then this is our result. Our random forest model results showing that the global methane soil sink is also larger than the previous estimation of about 30. So it's about 50 teragrams. So it's kind of comparable with our bottom-up result. And the last part is about atmospheric modeling. So we wanted to understand what's the effect of this large methane soil sink to the atmospheric methane and methane isotope. So we applied this revised soil sink, 60 teragram per year is from the bottom-up model, and then we ran the TM5 model, atmospheric model from 1984 to 2016. Because there is more soil sink, more methane is absorbed, we have to have some emission, more emission. So for this scenario, we added more emission to wetland. So the total sink became larger, 600 teragram per year during the simulation period. So the default is 570, but we increased 30 more teragrams. And there is some details on the methane isotope. From the menu of how many of you are familiar with the methane isotope. So basically, we are considering the C13 of methane, stable carbon isotope. So when methanotrophy, this bacteria consume methane from the atmosphere, they prefer light carbon. So because of their enzyme, they prefer light carbons. As a result, the residual methane in the atmosphere becomes heavy. And this fractionation is actually really is uncertain. So for this simulation, we use 15 and 21 per mil, which is the low and mid values from the literature. And we compared our our model with our observation. Noah and her school were both air measurement data as you can see here. So this is the result. Okay, so left one is long-term methane. Our data from 1984 to 2016. The right one is methane isotope. So the delta notation is, as you can see here. I can explain more later if you are interested in, but both, so this blue line is old soil sink, so smaller soil sink, and the yellow one is larger soil sink. You can see both match pretty well with the observation of methane, but for methane isotope, this yellow line with the new soil sink doesn't match well. It's because, as I just explained, more soil sink than bacteria, it's more light carbon, so the residual methane becomes heavier in the atmosphere. So you can see the simulation show heavier atmosphere methane in terms of C13. But when we reduce the soil fractionation to 15, you can see that it matched pretty well with the observations. So the result showing that the soil sink fractionation factor is really important for us to validate our model with the observation. This is one last thing that we found from our isotope measurement. So basically, having more soil sink has some implication on north-south gradient of the delta C13 of methane. So basically, if we add more soil sink, we add more wetland emissions accordingly, and that costs more deeper north-south gradient. If you are interested in it, we just published a paper back in June on this topic. So we basically modeled the wetland carbon isotopic signature of methane, and we try to understand what's the implication of it to the global methane budget. So yeah, we just published it, so if you could read it, it would be nice. So this is our summary. I don't know how much time do I have?
3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay. So we revised the global methane soil sink based on 3 independent methods, and from the process-based model and machine learning estimation, we think that the soil sink is actually quite underestimated. It's probably twice larger than the current estimation. And using the atmospheric modeling, and using the soil sink as an input, we kind of match with the long-term methane and methane isotopes, but the results really vary based on the fractionation factor and mass balance. So here are some future work, but we are writing a paper right now, so it will take a while, but probably within a year you can see our publication in some journals. So. Yeah, thank you. So I will.
Maybe we should have one
question.
Yeah.
Any question? Okay.
For empiricists on the ground, what measurements are most useful to informing your models, improving your models?
Yes. So yeah, a lot of data that we use is actually from the chamber, like the root is measuring. Yeah, so it's not from the eddy covariance, but eddy covariance can also measure soil sink, right? I think, kind of, yeah. There are not
less directly, but sure.
Yeah, so I think more data so a lot of people are interested in wetland where a lot of methane emission is happening, but methane soil sink is also important. It has some implication on methane isotope and the global methane budget. So I think if you measure more methane isotope and methane in your flux tower, I think it would be very useful for us, for me to validate the model.
Sorry. So upland sites.
Yeah, upland site, like Boreal Forest, it should be an upland methane soil thing, but I'm not sure if you measure methane. Yeah, because it's not like, yeah, usually when people measure methane, it should be a methane. Like they usually go to a large methane soil source site, but I think methane sink should be also measured for an activity. Like when we upscale the model, when you do the upscaling using your bottom up site level estimation, then when you have a methane soil source only, then I think your model will be upscaling, will be overestimating the methane source. Yeah, so we need more methane measurement for upland soil sink site, I think. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, a few quick announcements. First off, thank you to all the speakers this morning and to Kuhn for chairing the section. So we have lunch now. Cafeteria is open. You heard the bell. And during lunch, we're having an early career panel on career trajectories outside of academia, and that's going to be here. So if you're interested in joining, go grab lunch, come back, and we'll have the panel session here for about an hour. We have an hour and 45 minutes for lunch in total, so hopefully you'll get some free time to mingle too.
So we're gonna get started. Hi, welcome to the career panel. We're talking about alt academic careers. Today we have 5 folks that are joining us, including Trevor. We can have a spot right here. Including these lovely folks, we also have Rebecca on screen. And for the interest of time, I'm gonna let each of them tell you a little bit about themselves for about 5 minutes. If you are not aware, you received an email this morning that has their contact information and their position, so you can always follow up with them there. And these folks are in person, so you can talk to them, obviously, after that. In the document, we did have some proposed questions. So we'll go through and ask those questions and moderate questions from the audience as well. For those folks that are online, you can enter your questions on the document as well. And Sarah's going to be reading from that, so we make sure that you have an opportunity to ask questions as well. So with that, we would love to let Rebecca go first, our virtual guest.
Okay, sure. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So my name is Rebecca Johnson. I'm a sustainability specialist at Fresco Solutions. I'll get to my job and what I do there, but I'll start with my background. So firstly, I did my bachelor's degree in environmental science at the University of Guelph. I'm a Canadian and based in Canada still. Then I went on to do several research positions to find out some of the interesting things that were in environmental sciences, mostly focusing in on agriculture, and some of it also related to climatology and greenhouse gas measurement. So with that, I kind of learned a lot about the greenhouse gas side, which is kind of where this the whole AmeriFlux comes into this. And then from there, I did a few research positions, one in carbon sequestration using eddy covariance systems, one in a greenhouse trial with agriculture, and then another one related to nitrous oxide emissions. So I kind of learned from there that I was really interested in soil sciences and greenhouse gas measurement. And so from then I did a master's degree in environmental sciences, focusing on greenhouse gas quantification and instrumentation. And I worked with my lab and some of our team to develop a greenhouse gas measurement system, focused mostly for nitrous oxide emissions on agricultural fields, not a field scale one, but a more kind of mid-sized plot system that worked better than chambers. So that was my master's degree. And then from then, I actually participated in a course and a program, part of my master's. It was called an NSERC Create course. It's specific to Canada. So if you know of NSERC, it's a big federal research body that provides funding. And there was a program that was specific to climate smart soils that my advisor, Dr. Claudia Wagner-Riddle, nominated me to do. And this program gave me a lot of experience with soil sciences and climate sciences, basically. So from then, I did an internship in carbon sequestration on Canada's managed soils. And then after that, I worked a few different jobs and then went to the position I'm at now, which is a sustainability specialist at Fresco Solutions. We are a small agricultural and environmental consulting firm based out of Alberta, but we work across Canada and internationally. We have people working remotely across the country, so it's a great place to work, really great team. Most of the work that we do is related to environmental consulting, mostly strategic advisory work, but we also do some project development with our clients. And our clients can range from provincial to federal agencies within Canada, non-governmental organizations, industry organizations for agriculture, but largely we work with corporate entities in the agricultural supply chain and sustainability. So we work a lot with carbon offset development and advising companies on how to decarbonize their supply chains. We work to develop sustainability strategies and implementing different projects and programs to decarbonize their supply chain. So my specific background is in agriculture. So most of my focus has been with agricultural projects, working with PepsiCo, with the Dairy Farmers of Canada, with Nature United or the Nature Conservancy in the rest of the world, Nature United in Canada. And but we also work to do bioenergy, waste, other nature-based solutions, so forestry, grasslands, wetlands, all kinds of projects related to that. We also do a lot of strategic advisory work for our clients and some of the other entities within the sustainability space. So you might not know about these, but in the corporate and market pathway side of sustainability, there's major carbon offset registries that develop protocols and methodologies for reducing greenhouse gas emissions or removing greenhouse gas emissions from specific practices or specific strategies. This could be renewable energy, it could be soil carbon sequestration, it could be grasslands, wetlands, forestry, etc. So we work a lot with them because it's very technical nature developing these methodologies. So we often work with them to revise and update these methodologies. We work with companies to deliver some of these methodologies. So it's very technical nature and very related to greenhouse gas emissions, but it's from the agricultural and nature-based solutions side. So that's my background, a lot in the corporate world, but if you have any more questions, feel free to ask them. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm not sure, like, can the folks virtually, can you hear us when we talk like this?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. We'll just go down the line. Would you like to go next to us?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. My name is Milos Markovic, and I'm Associate Sales Director in Picaro's Environmental Division. I've been with Picaro for about 7 years and started as a sales representative. But before I talk a little bit about what I do at Picaro, much like Rebecca, I want to go back and sort of talk about my path to this position because I think it's very relevant to what we're discussing today. So I started as a chemist. My training is in chemistry. I did a bachelor's degree at York University in Toronto in analytical chemistry, more specifically instrumental analysis. And then after that, I did a PhD at University of Toronto in environmental analytical chemistry, and more specifically in atmospheric science in Jennifer Murphy's group. There I studied PM2.5 particulate matter chemistry and precursor gases like NOx, nitric acid, ammonia. And then after completing a PhD at University of Toronto, I did a postdoc at NOAA in Boulder, where I took part in some very exciting field campaigns with NASA and NOAA aircraft-based research, where we measured black carbon particles and their transport into the upper troposphere. After that first postdoc, I did another postdoc with Environment Climate Change Canada back in Toronto, and also studied chemistry of particulate matter. And it was after that second postdoc that I was kind of at a crossroads and I started thinking harder about, next steps. And I ended up transitioning into the private sector, working for Picaro, starting as a regional sales manager for Canada and East Coast US. That was a bit of a shift in pace, and everything was new, and it was an interesting move for me. It was very different than what I used to do as a scientist, but there's a lot of parts of this job that are really close to us as scientists, and we're still involved in these meetings and conferences and talk to academic level researchers and also government labs, and so you're still kind of exposed to science, but rather than doing a lot of this work and publishing papers, we're focusing on how to support people that are currently in a field or in a lab doing research. So recently I got promoted to Associate Director of Sales. So now I manage the sales of our products and services across the Americas, and I manage a team of application scientists and sales reps. And so some of responsibilities that I'm involved in is supporting customers on large grant proposals, working with our R&D and product management and application science teams to come up with new applications, new products, new peripherals, all in hopes of providing high quality research equipment to our customers. And so I'm happy to talk more after this meeting. We have a table over there, so please come by. Happy to talk about different positions or unique experiences with everyone. So if whoever wants to come by, happy to tell my story.
Thanks, Niels. Next up, we have Kristen.
Yeah, my name is Christine Brichner. You all have my email address. I originally studied chemistry in Berlin in Germany. And for my PhD, I did something super unrelated to AmeriFlux. I looked at how the atoms are arranged in glass. So high resolution microscopy. And then after my PhD, I wanted to do a different technique. So that's how I got to Berkeley Lab. I got an exchange fellowship from the Humboldt Foundation to do a postdoc there. And there I worked on polymer membranes that are used for seawater desalination, studying the surface chemistry using X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy. And then, a year and a half into my postdoc, I in my first postdoc at least, I started kind of looking around and prioritizing what I want to do with my time. And that's when AmeriFlux posted a position for basically project management. And so I liked working at Berkeley Lab. And so that was my first place to look for other jobs that are involved in science, but maybe not so much collecting the data and looking at the data all day. And so, yeah, I got this job now. My title is a program manager, and 2/3 of my time are on AmeriFlux, making this meeting happen, but also we have these 13 core site clusters, flux sites that we support with a budget for operations. So I'm their point of contact for budget questions and for, yeah, just checking on how they're doing and just general project management, lots of budgeting. And I find a lot of time in this job that I didn't really expect to just also think more about how we do our work, how we work as a team, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and just kind of a little bit strategic long-term. Yeah, so I'm here, I'm at the dinner tonight. Yeah, ask me questions. Thanks, Kristen.
Yeah, I don't know. We want to say thank you, I guess. James, do you want to
Yeah, sure.
talk about yourself?
My name is James Katalankal. I'm originally from India, and my background is in agricultural methodology. And then I came over, I did a PhD in environmental science. And just like many of you, I had to set up a flux tower. I had to set up a flux tower in the salt marshes of Virginia. So after that, I have some history with AmeriFlux because I worked for AmeriFlux for a couple of years as a QA/QC postdoc. I went around, climbed a bunch of towers. It was not going well with my body. It was a really good and interesting experience because I probably went to like 14 sites or something and did, at that time, it was 2008 to 2010, I believe. And then I was looking for something more permanent, and Lycor was trying to expand more into the covariance domain. And so they had a position open, and so I applied for that. And I've been with Lycor for almost 12 years now. And my title is Senior Application Scientist. So I work in the technical support part. Right? I probably talk with, if you work in the field with instrumentation, you probably talk with me at some point. And then we started doing software and processing data, taking your data all the way from raw data to your complete QA/QC done fluxes, and we have software for all of that. So, we were involved in getting the data all the way back to the complete process numbers at some point. So, I'd also deal with soil systems. So, I guess I have talked with many people, and so I kind of get a feel for what everybody's doing. And so, I'm here. If you have more questions, we can discuss about any aspects of your research. You can, of course, yes. And it's nice to be back here for a long time.
Thanks, James.
Hi, everybody. My name is Trevor Keenan. I'm a professor at UC Berkeley and research scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. My trajectory is long and winding. I guess I started with an undergrad and master's in mathematics in Ireland, in Dublin, and in England, in York. And then after some time, I did a PhD in land surface modeling, drought impacts in land surface models at the University of Barcelona. From there, I did a brief stint as a postdoc at Anam, Mexico. That was just about 6 months before this other position as a postdoc came up at Harvard University, which I started back in 2010. So that was my first real postdoc, I guess. From there, I took up a soft money position as a research scientist at Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia. And from there, I took up a semi-soft money position at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, which I guess you can consider outside of academia, but I definitely consider it firmly within the academic sphere. And after a few years there, I started my position that I currently hold as an assistant professor on campus or associate and research scientist at Berkeley Lab. So I have a 50-50 position between the national lab and my position on campus. Of relevance, I guess, to the discussion today over the past year and a half, I guess, I've gotten more and more involved with industry. What is industry in our carbon cycle focused world, I guess you could ask, is primarily focused around natural climate solutions space and different companies that are very new, let's say. So like the Chama, Cotivo, Rickshaw, for example, you know those names. From January 1st, I will most likely take up a new position as chief scientist for one of those companies, for Jhon. So working directly in industry in the natural climate solution space. So that's kind of my trajectory and where I'm at. And similarly, ask me anything. I'm here. I'll be here all day, tonight, dinner, whatever. I'm happy to chat with any of you about.
Thank you for all the panelists for your introduction. So we're gonna move to questions now. So we have some questions from the community already on Google Docs. So please add if you have more questions, and people attending here, like just raise your hand. Is there any questions?
We just added one to the questions number 6.
So, yeah.
During any of your trajectories, did you consider being in academia, and was there ever a point where you're like, I want to do an academy in the academic sphere? And then during it was something that diverted you from academia? Did that happen to anybody? Everybody?
Yeah. So I would say that first 4.5 years of my PhD experience, that was kind of the only trajectory, right? Mm-hmm. Academia, you know, postdoc, and then, you know, if you're fortunate enough to land a faculty position, that was the ultimate goal. If not, maybe a research scientist position in a state or local or federal government lab. But that was kind of it. I wasn't even aware of a lot of these career paths outside of academia or government research lab. And so at some point during that PhD, the more I got to see other sides of it, and, you know, the more you get exposed to, you know, programs and applying for funding and sitting on committees and seeing what other aspects of an academic position are, I've realized that maybe that's not something that would work for me in the future. But then I said, let's do a postdoc or two just to be sure. At that point, it became clear that I should consider alternative careers.
Yeah, so for me, yeah, I also, in grad school, most of the career, you know, possibilities that were talked about in the group were academic. Everything else just didn't get that much attention, and in hindsight, I think it just took me those 7 years of a PhD and a postdoc to realize the fundamental misunderstanding on my end about what it is to be a PI, because I had, you know, the older postdocs who would go on to be assistant professors, and then we would chat at conferences, and they would always complain that they have to do the budgeting and the hiring and the mentoring and the teaching and the project management, and it takes so much time away from the research. And then in my filter, I heard, you get to do all these fun things. And then at some point I realized, oh no, actually what they want you to do is the research. And then I realized all the other stuff seemed way cooler. and so that's how I finally realized I need to pivot to something that's just one step removed. And yeah, so now I get to basically help the researchers find more time for their research.
I mean, I think I saw what my advisor was doing. He was there every weekend and doing something, you know, right? And then we could see the new faculty, during the first few years, before you get tenure, you are up all night writing proposals and doing this stuff. And then like, this is kind of tough job. Don't relax in life. And then, the thing is, you have to have the right opportunity to come up at the right time. That also happens. So then this came up and I was doing a lot of tower stuff, which I liked. So it all worked out at the end.
My experience was kind of the opposite in terms of, we could study online, maybe I should go that last.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll jump in. So I actually haven't done a PhD, and I think that was my ejection from academia, was before I got to that point. But I finished my master's right at the beginning of COVID. So I did feel there was something stopping me from continuing on in academia, because I felt like I had to move to go to a different university. And at the time, travel looked very uncertain and moving looked very uncertain. So for me, I almost feel like I didn't get a choice to continue in academia. And so I did find industry, and I worked a few jobs that were related to the agricultural sector before doing sustainability work. But once I got into this position, it was very clear to me that there is a huge talent gap in sustainability work in the carbon market and sustainability space, because people do not realize that there is a huge need for technical minds. And so I'm kind of glad I was, pushed out of academia in that way, because there are so many job opportunities here that, have a lot of the same backgrounds you would have if you have some sort of greenhouse measurement or quantification background. That's my 2 cents. Go ahead, Trevor.
Yeah, maybe because my path was different and I'm still in academia. My response.
Questions. We need
questions kind of mute, but I would second that, like what you commented on, the talent gap. There's like a huge and very growing talent gap in the emerging field of nature-based land solutions, everything in industry focused around agroecology or any agricultural systems. And a lot of companies growing into that space and capital flowing into the space that needs. So just to second that, and it's for me a really, really exciting time to consider not being in that. I know it's a scary thing to consider, but there's the opportunities now compared to 10 years ago are just like, it's a different world, and it's an exciting world. Hopefully it will continue. It's a new thing that's happening. But yeah.
Thank you for all the answers.
I have
as well. Yeah.
So, hearing that there is now it's a different world, because we have many opportunities other than, not only academia, but I think I'm not aware of those. So, AmeriFlux, so for example, job postings are always related to postdoc or PI or whatever, but is it possible to put a short list of these companies, links, or any workshop that we can invite those speakers to hear more about them? Because to be honest, I have no idea about the nature climate solutions companies or any markets carbon cycling, a couple of them maybe, but not really. So maybe because of being academia, you're only focusing on research and you are not checking anything in the industry. But I believe that, as you said, it's a different world, and you would be more, talents or valuable for industry with your skills. So just, offer for AmeriFlux can provide us such information or a workshop just to make us more knowledgeable about that part.
Let's do it. Also just quickly in response, suggest that there are centralized climate job postings for industry focused. So it's climate-based is one that sends out every few weeks a long list of jobs, and they're not just science jobs, they're also marketing roles and other which could be science jobs too. But sign up to those. Keep an eye out, just even if you're not actively looking, just get a sense of what's out there. Very helpful.
Yeah, just to add on to that, there's another newsletter. This one has news and also job posting. It's called Carbon Pulse. It's more specific to carbon offset markets, so not as much in the forestry or natural climate solutions space, but still it shows a lot of the different types of jobs that might be there and some of the smaller or up and coming companies, because the space is changing all the time. There's always companies either merging together or coming out with new companies, and so it's kind of hard to keep track of all the different company names, but usually they know everyone in the industry. So some of those newsletters are really good just to see what kind of jobs are out there.
Can I jump in? Yeah. So in addition to those things, I would also recommend that next time you're at a conference like AGU, to spend a little more time at the exhibitors hall. So we see, when I was going to AGU as a researcher, as a PhD candidate, most of my time was spent in lecture halls and in poster halls, right? And I've always skipped that last part, except if I wanted to go get a cool gadget or something like that. But I would strongly encourage you to spend, maybe if you're thinking about going into academia, maybe even more time in that exhibit hall than in a poster session. And another good free tool is LinkedIn. There's a lot of information. Create your profiles, start conversations, follow groups. There's groups, careers in different types of industry. There's companies you can follow. You're also making yourself visible to recruiters. And as Trevor said, this is a really good time to transition into industry. And a lot of that starts with some scouting or research on LinkedIn and other platforms.
Yeah, is it about this?
Yes.
Okay.
Kind of like tangent.
Yeah.
So one thing that I find a little bit opaque, like looking at, I look at a lot of postings for like industry related positions and things like that at some of the startups and larger companies, and I find it a little bit hard to understand like the internal like hierarchical structure of some of these positions and what is an appropriate level to target as like someone with a PhD. And sometimes it's like is it, how different is research 2 position, like research scientist 2 versus like lead scientist A, or like something like that. Like they're all kind of, compared to in the academic sector where it's like, okay, it's a grad student, postdoc, blah, 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 blah. And I get like maybe at a larger company, that's something you contact the hiring manager about, but how do you get that information and know what is the appropriate level of target when they're applying to these jobs, if it's not like a huge company that has a person whose job is to like communicate that information to them.
Any questions?
Yeah, I think, the job I applied to was called Program Operations Analyst, which is meaningless. And yeah, I was in the good position that it was in basically, my own company. I was already a postdoc. So I was able to do 2 things: to talk to people. I knew one person in the chemistry division who had that title. So I went and asked her, what is it like? And then internally, I was also able to look at the pay, which was not in job ad, to just kind of figure out if the step makes sense from what I had as a postdoc. And I would actually recommend, even though maybe it's a tiny bit harder if you're looking outside of your own employer, to just contact people and try to work your network to, look on LinkedIn. Like if you look at Lycor, it's going to tell you 5 people from your university work there. And then you can message, them, and most people are happy to, get in a Zoom call and just answer some questions and kind of give you a little bit of background information. And so, yeah, that's often you need to do that because you're right, the job ads are a little bit opaque.
and I can tell you, like in LICOR, usually an analyst is like somebody with a master's or a bachelor's, something. And then but at the end, like when I applied, I was in application science. Now I'm a senior application science. But the science, they say it's related to the PhD kind of degree. But I know all the analysts which were there are now scientists, because there it's all experience, how much time, how much skill you have, that kind of stuff is eventually decides where you end up, right? So, and then a scientist can become a sales guy. Things change rapidly sometimes. It all depends where your interest is, and so that at that point it's like the name of the portion really doesn't matter much. It's mostly like, okay, what you can do with it, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would add to that in industry, there is a little more fluidity and flexibility, a little less structure, for example, in government or in academia. So if you doubt that you're qualified for a position or feel that you're overqualified for a position, I would say throw in your application, and then you can sort of discuss with the hiring manager and HR person where you fit on that scale. And so there's some flexibility and fluidity. You'll be able to, for example, if they're looking for somebody more senior, they would say, sorry, we're looking for somebody more senior, but we like you. We feel you're a great candidate for a more junior position. So we'll let you know when that opens up, or maybe we'll make one for you because we like you that much. So there's, a lot of things can happen, but it's good to have that conversation. And when I applied for my first industry position, I actually reached out to hiring managers, said, look, I went through a job description. I do not meet these criteria, but I feel like my experience in science can help me get there quicker. And they said, let's have a conversation about it. And I'm getting the job. So another thing was a relocation. They asked me, they wanted ideally a candidate within US, and I wanted to stay in Canada. And turns out that's not an issue either. But if I just went by job description, I would be discouraged to apply, and I wouldn't. But I said, I'll throw it in anyways and hope to talk about it. And it worked out. So.
I'm writing some of these answers down under the resources. So if at any moment, like you don't get an opportunity to share your resource, like please do put that there, and we can just kind of learn from each other. So I'll go with one of the questions on the Google Doc. So the first comment question: so any resources or advice for applying to postdocs in Europe?
The Humboldt Foundation is, well, this is a specific, if you want to do a postdoc in Germany, it's a foundation that does two things: sending German postdocs abroad and bringing foreign postdocs to Germany. The application is competitive, but it is only 5 pages, short proposal. And they're a really good foundation. They're really flexible with, when you need to travel, you get extra money to bring family along. And that was the best part of my postdoc, was being part of the Humboldt network. And so a lot of European countries actually have an exchange postdoc program that's worth looking into.
There's also the Marie Curie fellowship that sponsors people to go to Europe for a postdoc. It's very generous, it's very competitive, but it's definitely worth applying to. I'd also suggest reach out to PIs if you know there's somebody you want to work with. And the pure fact that you want to work with them means probably a really good fit for the work they do. And honestly, it's really hard to find good postdocs who are a good fit for the work that you're doing. So I'm often super excited to get an email from somebody who's a good fit for the group, has like a good CV, and publish and stuff. I'm really happy to get those emails. I'm not a postdoc now, but I know somebody in the group is leaving in 6 months or a year. I haven't advertised, but then I'm like, oh yeah, much easier to hire this person and go through all of that process of advertising and super active.
Question?
I'm wondering if you can comment just a little bit about how to interpret requirements in job postings, because I think a lot of times postings will list a very large list of things that are, they say, required experience and skills, like we require somebody to have experience in all of these things. And I think you can look at the list and say, well, I don't have like 5 things on here, so I have no chance. But I've heard from a lot of people that, you know, usually that list means more, like they would be happy if somebody actually had half of them. But it's, I think, difficult to know how to really interpret that. So do you have any comments? Rebecca, you want to go first?
Yeah, I will. That's a great question. As someone who's been, you know, I job searched pretty recently, a lot during COVID, and I have a partner who's doing it right now in a different industry, but it's very funny, actually. It's sad a little bit, but yeah, I would say it really depends on the industry, and it depends. So in comparison, like a lot of tech jobs, for example, it just is the state of the industry versus, you know, my industry and more environmental sustainability stuff. There's not a lot of job, like there's too many job openings and not a lot of people. So they're a lot more flexible. And then other industries can be even more different. And as well, depending on the size of the company, I would say in industry, if it's a smaller company and more startup oriented, they will want you to have every single thing possible in a candidate, and that's just not reasonable. But you can kind of show, like, you know, these are my real strengths here in an interview, or these are the things that I think I'm really excelling at versus, you know, some of the things that I want to, you know, learn at this position. And when you're upfront about those things, it can be really helpful for hiring, as, you know, we know where that applicant will probably fit best within the company. And again, as when you get larger companies, I think they become more flexible. Again, there's a comment on the chat here, how Campbell Scientific created a job for someone who had the perfect background. So those things happen all the time. And I think it's definitely intimidating to look at a job application and they say these are all the requirements. For like a federal job or some sort of, you know, government-based job, it's usually they require most of those things. You won't get your application looked at if you don't have or don't explain how you have those qualifications. At least that's the case in the federal, Canadian government. But in industry, it's so much more flexible. Don't feel afraid to apply anyways. And yeah, go ahead. That's my take. Yeah.
But you want to see? Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. So anyone who turns down the camera will up here.
Oh, okay. Hey Ben, we can Ben Conrad, you turn on your camera. So I'm not sure if you wanted to say something. You're more than welcome to jump in. But just know that we can see you. How you doing?
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate what I put in the chat, you know, as far as job applications go or job descriptions, you know, it's not as bad as applying for a government job where, you know, they're going to, you may never get past human resources if you don't have those, you know, those minimum required. It all depends on who writes the job description and how well they do, right? And so, you know, for the most part, we're certainly looking for specific backgrounds. We try to be a little bit general in whether they come from, you know, for example, I manage environmental research, right? So that could be anything from somebody that has a background in aerodynamics, or somebody has a background in physics, or somebody that has a background in biology. It could be Trevor, who has a background in mathematics. So we try to make those as general as possible so that we open up our pool, right? And so what's key for us is somebody that is very passionate and driven to come work at our company. Of course, you have to have kind of the foundation in the background, but you don't have to be a complete expert right off the bat, right? And so we're looking for somebody that has kind of the bones there, the foundation, and we can build upon. So don't be discouraged by you know, all the stuff that's put in the job applications, at least for, you know, for some of the bigger companies. I think that point has been put across. It's always worth applying, because even if you aren't right for one position, there may be something else, or there may be something coming down the line. There may be something else in the company that's not, you know, even in the same department, that you might have a good fit for.
Yeah, something else you can consider, it's pretty industry specific, I think, whether applications include cover letters. But if they do, the cover letter is basically where you make the connection between your CV or your resume and the job description. And you kind of say, okay, your job description says I should work with this programming language. I know these other two, so I'm pretty sure I could learn the one you use. Or, you know, you can make connections and say, well, I have this kind of people skills and you have this slightly related thing. And you kind of convince them that you have actually read the description, even though you're not a perfect fit. You've decided the work sounds interesting and you can learn the things you don't already bring. Because a master's and a PhD are, at the end of the day, a certification that you are very good at learning a thing. And so, you know, if you've done a master's or a PhD, you basically, you know, you can learn the next thing, whatever it is.
I'm just going to jump on this because it feeds into what I wanted to say, is that if you would like to increase your chances of HR and hiring manager looking at your resume, reduce it to 2 pages and sort of switch it over so it's not your academic type resume. It's important to show your transferable skills and your foundation, and sort of present the skills that make a good candidate for the position. But don't overwhelm them with 5 pages of presentations and, you know, second author posters and things like that, because that's a very good way to kind of put that on the follow-up list and look at some other resumes. But generally, do not get discouraged by listing requirements or job description, because that's what that ideal candidate would look like, or maybe broad, as it was mentioned before, to open up a list of applicants. But my suggestion would be throw it in there and run with it if you like the position and you think it'll be a good candidate.
I can add, like, you know, we have hired people in tech support who have never used the LICOR instrument before. So we just, you know, it's all what, you know, when we interview someone, we look at what they can learn and what they have done. You know, that kind of stuff is, if they have that right skill, they can learn this instrument. You can see that. It's not something which is impossible to do. So that's the main thing.
Question. So which job is closely related to the flux measurement? So which job beyond academia, and it's very closely related to the eddy covariance measurement studies. So we can just go directly to that type of job. And another thing is that that publication seems not that important for the industrial job application, or it's what's the importance of publication for the industrial job application? That's my 2 questions.
So we'll start with the first one, maybe. What jobs other than academia are directly including flux measurements? So obviously we have our sales folks here.
Beyond the LICOR,
I can tell you, like, I have a flux tower running in LICOR for the last I don't know, 10, 11 years.
Yeah.
At some point, we even thought about submitting data to AmeriFlux, but it's kind of a hard thing to run a flux tower and do all kind of stuff. You know, like you guys know this stuff, right? I have did a lot of stuff related to flux tower. I have went to installations in different countries. I've been to Indonesia putting up towers. You know, at some point there was when Monsanto was there. You know, Monsanto is part of Bayer, right? Yeah. They used to do models. You know, they had like this field view, some kind of model where they want to tune those models with eddy covariance measurements. And they had us install stuff for them at some point. So there's all these kind of companies out there, but I don't know, there's a lot of new stuff which I see because we get in sales conversations where people are trying to figure out methane emissions, fugitive emissions from wells. I had a lot of companies which I've never heard in the last, 8 years, maybe in the last 2 years, I'm hearing, okay, who are these people? I never heard about them. But this kind of, there's a lot of stuff where they're trying to do leak detection and things like that, where they're trying to use EC method or evapotranspiration, like agricultural companies out there, which, selling farmers information on when they should irrigate their crops. But there's a lot of new stuff. I just hear bits and pieces because I've talked with people and they're like trying to look for instrumentation, right? So I'm assuming there are consulting firms which do this kind of stuff, which get the instrumentation from us. They do the measurement, California Air Resource Board. That's a company that's like, they were doing measurements on trying to estimate methane emissions from dairy farms and things like that. So they were doing eddy covariance. So a lot of government organizations also which do that. And then private companies, I see a lot more are coming in. But I don't have most of them are based in California. That's what
the state government of California. Yeah.
And I had even a company which was developing some chemical. We're trying to measure how it can absorb CO2. So they had soil chambers from us where they had their chemical in there and they're doing all kinds of experiments. But I just hear a lot of this kind of stuff. So there is a lot of stuff. And that whatever technique you learn, you will directly use it for actual measurement.
Yeah, and I'd support that, James, that there's, I hear about new companies all the time, and a lot of the people that are involved in these companies are coming from backgrounds of more software. And so they're software-based companies, but there's space in those companies to have background in flux measurements, for example, if we're talking about nature-based solutions, or we're talking about carbon credits, smart farming like Arva or Quantera systems. All of these new companies are coming up that they need software expertise, but then they also need the science expertise. So I think there's room for both. A lot of the students coming up now, they probably have really good experience in MATLAB and in C and well, maybe not C, but MATLAB and Python and all these languages, and that's all really valuable stuff to these new companies that are popping up.
Yeah, I would add to that if you're looking to transition into industry, you should keep your mind set, bigger picture, not just flux towers, but call it a hands-on or service measurement type field. There's quite a few different service companies that offer that kind of employment, like ACOM, like Clean Air Engineering, JJ Wolfer, Montrose Environmental. There's probably a ton more, but there are companies that under service contracts hire scientists and technicians to run equipment in field for industry to help them assess their emission footprint or indoor air quality or fence line emissions, all kinds of different careers there. But when it comes to instrumentation companies, and I'm going to speak for Picaro, I would say the closest positions within a company to that would be an R&D scientist or an application scientist. but we do not own a flux tower. We have active measurements going on. But those two positions would support that kind of work for customers of that line of work.
There's the other question about the role of publication and importance of publication is
for us, it will be only if you're getting into R&D department of the company. Other than that, I don't think there's a lot of advantages to having that included in your resume or promoting that as your greatest skill. I think that in private sector, more effort or more attention is paid to transferable skills like problem solving, troubleshooting, project management, analytical skills, data analysis, that kind of stuff, rather than the amount of posters and peer-reviewed papers.
If I could jump in to answer that second question as well. So I guess the thing is that, yes, it's the transferable skills that are really important. So, writing, especially in consulting, it's writing, being able to present. Those are really key things that I do every single day with every single client I work with. And having a publication on your application might show that you obviously do have good writing skills. If there's an opportunity to do some sort of technical interview that really can showcase your presentation skills, or doing a brief or some sort of technical nature to an interview process, don't be discouraged by that, because you can really show your communication skills on something that challenging. It takes some time, takes some work, but usually they're really happy with how you present or how you write.
Yeah, so we're close to ending, so maybe we can have one last question or comment. So, yeah, go ahead. You first.
So I was just wondering, how far back are you supposed to start having conversations with, PIs or companies that you want to work with?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that well.
How far in advance should you start looking for
So looking for?
Yeah, how far back are you supposed to start having conversations with PIs or companies that you want to work with?
So in my experience, at least for advertised positions, they are, people are looking to fill them fast, right? So unlike in academia where you could postpone your faculty position by a year so you can do a postdoc in Europe, in industry, from my experience, that works very differently. But if you're certain you want to transition in industry, I would say maybe a year before you graduate, or around that time, start having that conversation through networking, through talking to different companies. And so once that there's an opening, they're aware of you and what your skills are, and what you can bring to the company. But if it's a published or if it's already a posted job ad, then they're probably looking for stuff quickly. So at that point, it will be good that you're ready to move on with it.
And if you're not certain what you want to do, then you should just start now and talk to people in your network. And you could talk, even if you don't want to, or you're not sure if you want to be in academia, your PI could still connect you with previous people from his or her group. And that can be a really good source of just having some conversations that, you're not asking them for a job, you're asking them, what are you working in? Just like what we're talking about today, and just collecting that intel and figuring out, what options are out there. Because that takes a while, and to really get in tune with what you actually want, what you really want.
And say for PIs, if you know what you want, so you go, I want to do a postdoc with this group, probably 6 months is a good time frame ahead of when you'd be looking to start, because the people will get in touch with me and say, oh, I'm finishing my PhD in a year and a half. I said, oh, great. Okay, well, get back in touch with me in a year. Because I don't know if they'll still be interested in a year, and I don't know what funding will look like in a year and a half. But in 6 months out, it's typically pretty good. So these things are a lot clearer on both target sides.
I guess it gets complicated if you are an international person also, right? That is a different kind of thing because it's visas, all kind of stuff. And I was an international student, and it depends on what's happening in the economy at that time. So when 2008 was the recession, that's when the postdoc questions were there because money is available for research at that. But industry was not doing that great, that kind of stuff. So all these factors are to line up, right? So the more the advanced you can do stuff, kind of line up stuff.
I think for the industry, H1B visas in by March or something. There's like deadlines you have to watch out for.